Hey, hey.
Hey Phil, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Pretty good. Yeah,
Yeah,
doing good.
wonderful. It's good to have you on again. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm sorry to invite myself on.
No, it's great. I'm always looking for guests, especially ones that I've had already, and already know we get on like a house on fire and we have good chats. So I mean that
right.
sounds
Yeah, there
great
you
to
go.
me. So yeah. So you just finished up a new book then? Is it out? Are we kind of releasing soon, or
Yeah,
what's kind of
well,
timescale?
as of now, yeah, it's releasing the end on the 25th of August. So,
Okay, cool. We can probably time this to kind of come out right about then, probably.
okay,
I'll
that'd
try
be
and
cool.
figure out what my podcasts are. I'm getting really close to the wire. You always kind of try and
Oh
keep
yeah.
several ahead. It's just been too busy recently. I've just been mad. And so I've been slowly chipping away using more than I record because I do two a week. So, I mean, it's
Oh
a
wow.
lot to get through. So
You
yeah,
publish two a week?
two a week. Yeah.
Oh man, you're at a crazy pace.
Yeah. And they're big, long form as well. They're usually between an hour and a half, 2.5 hours. Like they're long podcasts. So yeah,
Wow.
not messing
No,
around.
that's great, man.
People
That's
love
really
it.
good.
People love it. So
Yeah, if people
if they're
keep if your
consuming it.
audience keeps up with it and they're I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense. Someone like Joe Rogan does like a 4 hour podcast every day.
Oh, he's like
Like
just nonstop, isn't he? Like,
that's pretty much his only gig, I think. So
yeah, yeah. To be fair, this is pretty much my only gig as well. I mean, I've got a lot of like things in the fire, but at the end of the day, this is what I'm putting out. So
yeah, your
if I can
main
put a
thing. Yeah.
couple out, it's not bad. But yeah, I got like the biggest compliment ever. The other day I was on Jeff Turner's new podcast he's about to release called Religionless.
Oh, cool.
You know Jeff Turner, right? You come across
I
Jeff?
know. Yeah, I do. It's familiar, and I don't know if I've talked to him or not. But
Okay. He's
did he have a
awesome.
podcast before that?
No, he's just
Okay.
launched one. I mean,
Okay.
he was kind of in that the grace movement, like lots of people kind of tracking with him for a long while, and he wrote The Atheistic Theist,
Okay.
and just he's awesome. Honestly, like if you could have him on your show, you should have him on your show. He's
Okay.
amazing. But
Yeah.
he just had me on his, or well, he's not releasing his show yet. He's trying to get loads ahead. But
Good.
he was like, he introduced me. He's like, and this is Phil. He's like the Joe Rogan of the deconstruction world. And I was
There
like,
you go.
yes, I made it.
I would take that as a
Yeah,
compliment.
yeah.
That's pretty
I
cool.
assumed it was. I said to him, like, I assume this is entirely because of my muscle mass and my addiction to DMT, right?
Right.
Nothing to do with my podcast.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
knowledge of jujitsu, and
Yeah. I would definitely love to have those numbers, though.
Oh my gosh,
He's got crazy numbers.
unbelievable. What was it? Was it 60 million he sold for, or 100 million? It was
Oh
something
yeah,
insane, huge amount of money.
yeah. It's some crazy amount of money. Oh, I just mean like his followers, but it's something like
Yeah,
like
but
six
I mean that
million.
that says it, right? I mean, like when you're selling to Spotify for exclusive, and they're like, yeah, sure, like you can still keep it free, you can do your thing, but we just want it to be on our platform. We'll give you 100 million. You're doing something right.
Okay. Okay.
You've got some sway, but yeah, it's mad. It's mad.
Yeah.
And Google screwed up there, not keeping them on YouTube, right?
Oh
And
yeah.
then
Exactly.
they really messed up. So
Yeah. I think they're gonna regret it. Yeah.
he was a big deal for YouTube, I reckon, and that's opened up the whole world. Like Spotify are making a specific video section on Spotify just for Joe Rogan's show, but obviously more things will come to it. But
Right.
that is a dangerous thing that YouTube probably didn't want other people to think about creating, is their own kind of micro platforms of
Right.
video
Now I will
content.
say, like, see, I do watch Rogan. You know, now and again, I'll watch it because I'm on YouTube.
Mm,
And because I do like him, so I'll look to see if he's got something new and if it looks interesting, like an interesting guest or topic. But I'm not on Spotify all the time, so I would
yeah,
have to make a point to go to Spotify to
yeah.
listen once he makes the shift. And so the question, I guess, will be how many people are
How many
willing
does
to
he
do
lose?
that?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't use Spotify. I don't listen to music, so I don't use Spotify. And I like listening to his podcast or watching it on YouTube on the side every night. But it's usually very specific guests. What I like
yes,
about Joe is he gets these kind of like fascinating people. Oh, he's an
yes,
astrophysicist. He's
yes,
she's a expert in sex, or all these different things. I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. But then I also like his like extreme right wing people that I'm like, oh, I
hmm
want to hear Joe just like draw out of them for 3 hours, like something. Because if they talk for 3 hours, I'm going to start to go, what else are they about? Like once we get deeper than all their kind of extreme talking points,
Yeah.
who is this person? Like, what's going on here?
Yes.
I kind of like him for that. But yeah, I don't know if I'll install Spotify just to kind of check out one every now and
Yeah,
again.
me either. We'll have to see, I guess.
Yeah. Probably will. If he gets some good guests and some people start talking, oh, you need to check out this, I probably will.
Yeah. Because like you said, bottom line, there's still the draw. I really love the conversations he has, the guests he brings on. Like, to be honest, I think this is kind of odd, but like probably it was one of the podcasts he did maybe about 2 years ago with one of these quantum physicist guys that first kind of got me interested in quantum physics, quantum mechanics, and all that. Like, it was just so amazing and mind blowing. And based on that conversation, then I started digging on my own, to look into a little bit more. So, I really appreciate his podcast because, he has great guests and he makes you think, and it's all over the place. It's everything from crazy conspiracy theory stuff to like actual real science to like musicians and artists and just celebrities and just all kinds. It's just across the board. Yeah. And it's always interesting.
And he is the worst for it as well, because he just accepts anything his guests say. Maybe he occasionally be like, oh, come on, you can't mean that. But on the whole, he's just like, okay. He just kind of gives them a soft, okay. And keeps them going. And like, it is really funny watching some of these people and you're like, Joe, last week you had an expert in this field detail to you why this isn't true. Now you've got some random person telling you something and you're like, oh, wow, fascinating. That's great. Right. Wow, so interesting. And I'm like, did you forget last week, or do you just not care?
But see, I think that's what you have to do to be a good interviewer.
You do.
Because he doesn't want to debate the person.
No.
You know what I mean? I think he just wants to let them talk. And I have seen him once in a while go, but I had somebody on a couple of weeks ago who wrote a book or did this and said that. What do you think about that? But he never does it to say, and that's why you're wrong. Yeah. He'll just say, so what do you think about what they're saying? And then let them go respond to that, but not to him.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably wise. So.
Yeah. No, that's what I try and do on mine, because I've had people on. I mean, I have a whole spectrum of people on, and realistically, I agree with the X amount of percentage of what they have to say. And a lot of time I have people on, I don't even agree with what they have to say, but I'm like, oh, this will be helpful and interesting for certain people within my audience or whatever. So yeah, and you kind of go, well, I'm not here to have a fight. I'm here to have them explain where they're coming from, maybe poke and, provoke a little bit and draw out better perspectives or whatever. But yeah, no, he's good at it. He's good. But yeah.
Well, the reason why I approached you about having a conversation on this topic, it wasn't honestly because of my book. It was just because I was on Twitter and it wasn't you, I think someone else shared a clip of you.
Oh yeah.
And you were saying something that I thought was just awesome. And actually, if you can repeat it for this conversation, it would be great. Because it was so good.
If you can remember what it was, tell me, I'll say it back.
Yeah. Okay, I'll just remind you. Hopefully you remember what it was. You were talking about how, on the one hand, the way the Pharisees, why the Pharisees missed Jesus as the Messiah, because they were looking for a particular type of Messiah. And so there were three things they were looking for. And then you explained that, and then you just kind of like flipped it over to where we are today and the kind of Messiah we're looking for today. Do you remember that?
I do. So I feel like, I think this is something that has been rattling around my head for about 10 years or so, but I think it was Andre Robb. Are you familiar with Andre?
I love him. Yeah, I've talked to him a couple of times. Yeah.
Yeah. Great. Oh, I love Andre. We always have him stay with us when he's in the UK. And honestly, he's one of my favorite people in the world. And I think it was him that said this originally in some fashion, shape, form. So it's not mine, or if it has become mine, it was largely stolen from him. I'm sure. And it might not. Maybe it was someone else. I've just crossed my wires. Maybe it was Francois Dutoit. I'm just thinking of a South African person, but I'm pretty sure it was Andre. But he basically put forward this idea that so there's basically, when Jesus shows up to the Pharisees are the experts. They're the people that know it all. They're the lay people that are really serious about their Bibles and their scriptures and their tradition. And they know what the Messiah is going to be. And he's going to give them three things. He's going to reward them for being the good good boys and girls for doing their thing. Well, just boys in those days, right? But the
Yeah.
good people, they did right things, so God will bless them and reward them. And then he's going to punish all the people that didn't. He's going to punish them. He's going to show them, you were wrong. You weren't the powerful ones. You weren't the right ones. God wasn't on your side. Your gods were false. And he's going to smash it in their face and rub their face in it. And then he's going to ultimately restore this an amazing, powerful Israel to power, and they'll rule over everything, and they'll be given power and authority and proven to be right. And all the other people in the world will be like put in their place and punished or wiped out or whatever it might be. And what's fascinating is they were really pissed off that Jesus shows up, right, and does like basically none of that. He's like, hey, I'm the Messiah. And they're like, okay, so you want to reward us? And he's like, no, you're the worst of the lot of them. You have a lot to figure out. Okay, so you're at least going to tell off all these like Samaritans and tax collectors. And no, I'm good with them. The prostitutes and tax collectors, awesome. Love those guys. They rough around the edges, but we'll get there. Okay, well, at least you're going to restore the nation of Israel. No, I don't really care about nations. That's irrelevant to me.
Yeah.
What? Kill this guy, right? But what's fascinating is if we look at the church today, right, the vast majority of conventional Christianity falls into exactly the same trope, right? And so they are looking for a God who is a Messiah, a Jesus that's coming back. And when he comes back, he's going to reward them for being the right type of people, the people that had said the prayer or were obedient servants, good Christians, right? And then he will punish everyone else for being wrong, for being evil, send them to hell or whatever, give them some tribulation or whatever it might be, some left behind stuff, who knows. And then he will create the ultimate, this new Jerusalem, the new power, rise to power. All the Christians will rule and reign and serve, and everyone else will be humbled and punished forever and put in their place. All the powers of the world, all those people that were persecuting the Christians and not letting them pray in schools and all that, they'll be punished and notched down, and we will be a powerful, amazing. And I am describing conventional Christianity.
That's right.
We have become what the Pharisees were, and we expect Jesus in his second coming to be a different Jesus than his first. And,
exactly.
And it's so true.
Yeah.
And again, I'm pretty sure I stole that from Andre Rowe on some level. At least it created my thinking in that. He probably laid it out better than me as well. I've probably butchered it and made it slightly worse.
The funny thing is, I think most evangelical Christians who hold that view that you just described, and even if you pointed it out to them, would go, yeah. They wouldn't disagree with anything you just said. That's right. The Pharisees were wrong about it, but we're not.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, we're not wrong now because we think the same thing. Like, they just had it out of order. They thought it was going to be that way the first time, and it wasn't, but it's definitely going to be that way this time. Like,
right. Yeah.
But the core thing is that they're expecting, and I think a lot of Christians have noticed this, right? They're expecting Jesus to be different, almost radically different than he was, the person that he was when he came the first time. Like, okay, the first time he came, he was the good shepherd, and he came on a donkey, and he washed feet, and he, turned the other cheek. But you know what I mean? But now he's coming back on a white stallion with a sword in his mouth, and he's going to kick some ass. And they're totally fine with that, right? They absolutely embrace that. And they don't see any disconnect to that way of thinking,
Yeah.
But you're exactly right. I mean, whether that's you or Andre or someone else,
someone probably inspired it before then, even, who knows?
Yeah.
But what do you think why do you think we do it? Because I mean, I did it. I did it for a long time. That was my concept of the Jesus that was coming back, and I looked forward to. I remember, like, as a 16-year-old, my first ever job, sitting in my office reading the Left Behind book, and my boss coming in and me being like, "Oh crap, stick that down." Like,
yeah.
But I was into it. Like, I remember vividly, like, plowing through Left Behind books. There was just endless books, wasn't there? I don't know how many, like 40-part book series or something.
Yeah.
They milked that thing, right?
Yeah, the end times take forever. It's only supposed to be like 3.5 years. And
I felt like I was living it in real time,
It's endless. Like, when does the end times end?
Yeah.
Like, my gosh,
and those guys with their, like, one plane still managed to keep the carbon footprint about the same. Like, those guys just flew nonstop. They were like, it was insane.
So here's what I think is fascinating about, and I want to have this conversation, but there's so many different facets of it, I think, to explore. But so here's what I think that was fascinating about sort of like the Tim LaHaye's, or if you go back to like Hal Lindsey, the late great Planet Earth, or even recently like John Hagee and some other guys who have the blood moons and all the so any of these guys who write books about Bible prophecy, and they've figured it out, they've cracked the code, they understand what it means, and we're so close. The end times are so close. Jesus is coming back any day now. In our lifetime, we fully expect to see Jesus. I mean, we've been saying this for over 100 years now, right? And we'll talk about why that is. But here's what I find really fascinating. What all of those guys have in common, 100%, what they all have in common is they are 100% wrong 100% of the time.
Yeah.
They're all wrong. They've all been absolutely wrong. I used to work at a Christian bookstore during the first Iraq War. We probably had like 5 different books about how Saddam Hussein was the Antichrist and Iraq was modern day Babylon, and all these scriptures that fulfilled and proved, that, according to Isaiah or Jeremiah or Daniel or blah, 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 this fits perfectly, overlays like a perfect glove.
Mm-hmm.
And we're in the end times, man. This is the end. And here's the thing, like I said, 100% of the time, they're all wrong. And
Right.
Here's what blows my mind, Phil. In spite of the fact that what they have in common is they're always wrong, it doesn't seem to hurt their popularity.
Not at
Any
all,
one
right?
of those guys, no. Any one of those guys today could put out a brand new book with new revelation, with a brand new set of reasons and rationales, and they would sell 100 million copies.
Dude, I'd go even further. They could put out the same book and just do a find and replace on the people or nations or something, and you
some
basically
of them, that's
be good.
kind of what they do. Yeah, that's kind of what they do. It's Gorbachev. No, it's Saddam Hussein. No, it's, you just swap out the names and the scriptures stay the same, but it's the person that it maps to, it changes, right?
Yeah, there's a weird dynamic because my background is charismatic Christianity. Well, I have so many backgrounds, but at one point I was very much in the charismatic movement, and there's this weird dynamic where it just isn't held for accountability. Like, I don't mean like, go back to the Old Testament and stone a prophet, he's not right, or any of that kind of crazy stuff. But I just mean like when a prophet gets up and says, God told me this president will serve as the president this year, and then they tell all their congregation to vote for him, and then he doesn't get in, right? And you go, well, when he gets up the next 4 years later and goes, God told me to vote this way, and everyone goes, okay, cool. Do they not go, wait, you were wrong last time. You didn't even apologize. You didn't even say, hey, I misheard. I must have got it wrong. There was none of that. Same deal with the blood moons, right? I didn't hear a single apology from Hagee, from Toronto got into it. A lot of like big movements. I was at a meeting in Ireland with John Arnott, literally got on the stage and said, next year, the end of the world will be here because that will be the final blood moon. And he literally, and I was like, I'm sitting there, I'm like, you did not just say that, John. You did not literally, I've heard you say kind of some of the stuff that we've said before, like where they go, look, we don't do the end of the world prophecies. That's, it's just not a good idea. It's been proven again and again. We're not looking at that. And then here he is. He really believed it, So, and hats off to him. I think it's okay if you really believe something like that. But to not then go, oh, I missed it, guys. It's just one thing to really feel you heard God say something and say it to people. That's one thing. You're going out on a limb. But to never go, I'm sorry, guys, I apologize, and then never to be served any scrutiny the next time you say exactly the same thing. It's a weird dynamic.
I think part of the reason, Phil, is that, again, because the people don't hold accountable these leaders, these prophets or whoever, pastors, authors, whoever they happen to be, because we don't demand any kind of apology. We don't say, listen, we're not listening to you ever again because you lied to us about this blood moon thing. And, and until you explain yourself, we're not going to listen to you again. Yeah. We don't act that way. We're like, what else you got? What else? Give me something else. Give me. We're like addicts, like, come on, man. I need a fix. I need my thing. Yeah. And we don't care that crazy story you told us was complete and utter nonsense. We're just hungry and ready. We're wide open for the next crazy thing you're going to tell us. And it's that we just seem to have this insatiable hunger, this endless, appetite for, tell us the future, tell us what's going to happen. And it doesn't even matter if you're wrong 100% of the time. Tell us something else. We just love those stories. We're like little kids. They're like, hey, yeah, Daddy, tell me that story again. Okay, but I want want to, if I can, just go into a little bit about some things because I did just write a book about this.
Yeah,
And
please.
wanting to try to provide some kind of historical background for Christians, like if you're like you and if someone like you or me observing this phenomenon, and maybe we did fall for it for a while. By the way, I've got a copy. I still have a copy of the book, 88 Reasons Why Jesus Will Return in 1988.
Wow. Yeah.
So, those kinds of things. So if you're somebody who's sort of like, yeah, I used to believe that stuff. I fell for it a couple of times maybe. But now I've gotten to the point where I'm like, oh, you know what? I'm so tired of this. But I still don't understand why we keep telling this story, why we keep falling for it. And see, I think you have to take a step back and say, well, what about, these prophecies are based on scriptures. So is it just that no one understands these scriptures? Because it seems like these Bible prophecy experts don't seem to really understand these prophecies because they keep getting it wrong. So, in my book, what I tried to do was provide some historical, framework for where all this kind of stuff comes from. And by the way, it's very recent. This is not a phenomenon that goes back to 2,000 years. Christians weren't acting this way or falling for end times rapture, second coming scenarios for, in the first century or the third century or even the 1500s. So
they thought Jesus was coming back, right? On some level,
they thought he was coming back, but they didn't buy into this narrative that they were just always looking at current events and trying to prove or map something to this Bible verse over here.
Right.
As if the Bible verse was talking about, current events. And so let me explain that a little bit. So, yes, early Christians did believe in the second coming. They believed that Christ was going to return. That's actually something that's even mentioned in some of the early creeds, the belief that Christ would return. But again, it wasn't the narrative that we have commonly accepted as normal or Christian. So it actually came from a guy named John Nelson Darby, and around 1830. So it's pretty recent. Around 1830, Darby popularized a view, dispensationalism, and specifically a dispensationalist view that took an end times rapture futurist view of these prophecies in the scriptures, specifically Daniel, Ezekiel, the Olivet Discourse in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and of course the book of Revelations. And so we have to first understand that as a point of reference, that before 1830, the average Christian did not connect the dots between Daniel and Matthew and Revelation and Isaiah and the way we do today. That was a brand new thing that Darby introduced.
And did he not get, I vaguely remember, and I'm not an expert in the end times at all, rapture, all that kind of good stuff. But from my understanding, he got a lot of that from someone that was in a meeting in the Hebrides revival where a young girl just gave some prophecy about it, right? And that's it. If you trace it back and there's not much to it. It's just some girl going, I just had a vision, or it's pretty profound. Talk about prophets not being held accountable, right? If that one had been, there's a lot of problems.
You know more than you think you do. Yeah. So if you go and you research Darby and you try to figure out, okay, so where did Darby come up with it? Yeah, there was a young girl at it was actually a conference on spiritual gifts or something. It was in England somewhere, pretty obscure. And this young girl had this vision, and she said that there were going to be something like 2 raptures, one very, very soon, and one maybe in 30 or 40 years from there. But there were going to be 2 quick raptures, and they were going to come really soon, and blah, blah, blah. And so it caused a lot of stir at the time. And Darby wasn't present at the conference, but he heard about it afterwards because it made a lot of people talk.
Well, because Christians love that, right?
Well, of course.
We don't change, apparently.
No, we don't. And apparently, there's evidence that he met with her and listened to her story, and then sort of took elements of her prophecy, and then that's when he kind of went to the scriptures and started trying to make it fit with some prophetic scriptures, right? And also something about the same time that happened, and this is really fascinating. Around about the same time, Darby fell off of his horse and hit his head.
Hmm.
And I think it was in the hospital, like almost like a semi-coma for a couple of days. And he says that after he fell off his horse and hit his head, he suddenly understood all these things. So take this with a grain of salt. Like this weird girl at a conference has this vision, and he falls off his horse, hits his head, and then has a knock on the head and goes, "No, I understand."
Wow.
So
It's a bit like Paul, really, isn't it?
Yes.
Falls off a donkey, goes, "Oh, I figured it out."
I figured it out. And so this is kind of for the first time he does this. So now here's again what is weird, right? We can stop and think about this. So like before 1830, this wasn't a common thing. And in fact, when Darby first introduced these ideas, people called him crazy, and he was a heretic, and he was nuts, and they didn't accept what he said, and he didn't find a big foothold in England initially. It was not until he came to America and started preaching at different churches there, and then he found an audience. So this appears to be a particularly American thing. We're like, oh, this sounds so cool. Tell us more, right? And so they kind of start eating it up, and then he gets really well. I should say, what's also I think fascinating in the chronology of what happened. There were some pretty prominent American Christian teachers, Bible teachers, and preachers who heard Darby's story version of the end time rapture thing, and they said, "Hey, no, time out. This guy, why are you guys listening to him?" And one of those guys was Charles Spurgeon. And in fact, Charles Spurgeon published a very lengthy article, at least one, but maybe more than one, where he condemned Darby, tried to illustrate like the errors and the mistakes, and that, hey guys, don't listen to this guy, he's a kook. So there were several people that did try to sort of sound the alarm that, guys, calm down. This isn't something we should take seriously.
Yeah.
But it became very, very popular. So what's very interesting about this too is, I don't know if you know who Ben Witherington is. You've heard of Ben Witherington?
Yeah.
Okay. He's a very respected, Bible teacher, New Testament scholar. And I was watching an interview with him where he was talking about this phenomenon. And he said, what's fascinating about dispensationalism in the early days is that it was a popular movement, meaning the average layperson really ate it up. They loved it. They couldn't, they were getting, tell me more, right? But it wasn't a scholarly movement. And so this is literally what happened. And this is according to Ben Witherington, that because it became more and more popular, Christian teachers and leaders started saying, what would be great? It'd be great if we had some sort of scholarship to back up this view that's really popular. And so that's where Dallas Theological Seminary and later on Talbot and Biola and some other Christian seminaries and schools were created. They were created to provide scholarship to justify a belief that people already believed. It's not the other way around, where the scholarship came first and people studied it and said, oh my gosh, we've seen this, and then let's go now and teach it to people. It was backwards. The people already swallowed it and believed it, and then it was like, boy, I wish we had some scholarship to make this thing seem a little more legitimate. I know what, let's start a seminary. Okay. And that's kind of what happened. And that is what happened. And between that and the Scofield Reference Bible.
Right.
I think actually the Scofield Reference Bible came ahead of that, where Scofield really thought that Darby was onto something and started incorporating some of Darby's teachings and notes into his study guide notes in his Bible.
Right. And it was one of the first study guide Bibles ever as well, right? Which is why, I mean, you're looking at, I know growing up as a Christian, right? When I had my Bible, it was like, the New Living Applied Bible or whatever, I can't remember what it was called, but it's something like that. Everyone had one. And like half of the Bible is just basically explaining to you what those Bible verses mean. And when you're reading and you don't really have any idea what the heck half this Bible is about, and you're like, wow, I just killed everyone. Oh, and then you immediately jump down, read what the expert said, and go, oh, okay, cool, I feel a bit better. Right. But you can open up I got a free ESV from like the Reformed movement. I can't remember what it's called, but it's like the Reformed ESV or whatever. And it's the same. And you look at the bottom half of that and you read the bottom half of the average charismatic commentary, the study guide Bible, or you read the bottom half of the purity study Bible, right? There's a purity study Bible. How on earth they managed to find purity on like, every page is amazing. But they figured it out. But, you know, you look at those and they're going to tell you completely different things.
Yes.
So if you're one of the first to the printing press with one of those, you have such incredible power because people are just kind of gonna hook, line, and sinker accept what
Yeah.
you say.
Yeah. And that is kind of what happened. So because it just became just, I guess, because of the volume. There's so many Christians, so many study Bibles, and now there were seminaries being, spinning. And these seminaries now are kicking out pastors who are now being hired and are standing in the pulpits, and now they're teaching from this perspective. And so it just slowly became not dispensationalism; it just became Christianity. Yeah, this is just the way it is, and no one ever does the compare and contrast for you and says, now this is one view and this is the view we hold and we think it makes more sense. But just so you know, there's other views and here's what they are. Like, no, they don't want you to, we don't want you to know about these other views. And we sure don't want to tell you that our view is something that, is about as old as Mormonism, because Joseph Smith in the same year started Mormonism in 1830. So if you think of it that way, this view of the end times is as old or as new as something like Mormonism. So it's a very recent development, and it's just very rapidly become, especially in the West, the only way to read prophetic scriptures like this.
I remember as growing up in the church, and I grew up in kind of evangelical Baptist, charismatic, Brethren. I was in quite a few different movements growing up through my first kind of 25 years. Every single church would lay out, here's your options with the end times. Nobody really knows. It's quite complex. Fair play to them. They kind of put that across and they said, it's one of these three views and you have to kind of figure out what you think. It's either post-trib, mid-trib, or pre-trib. And then you figure out one of those three and everyone will be like, wow, I'm post and you're pre, but that's okay. We're fine. And it's only when I started reading about this myself, and again, I've not studied it extensively because largely I'm just like, this is an area of study that nobody knows what the hell they're talking about half the time anyway. And we're all guessing anyway. But so it never really bothered me that much. But when I looked at it, just a cursory glance, I was like, holy crap, those three views are one view. They're some nuances within one view of a great many different views, of which this is the newest one. There's not really any newer views than this particularly. And all the other views have predated it substantially. I just blew my mind that nobody had told me this. I felt like so hard done by, I was like, come on, are you kidding me? You pretended there were some choices. It's like the kids, right? You take the kid to the park and you can play on this, this, and this, and you don't know that there's a freaking zoo next door or something. You're like, you kidding? You gave me choice, but I didn't know the zoo was a choice.
Exactly. Well, see, and you're ahead of the game on that, Phil, if you figured that part out, because a lot of Christians haven't figured that out.
It took me a long time.
They do. They're not aware of the fact that whether it's pre or mid or post tribulation, that view of an end times tribulation rapture, that's Darby's, that was his jam. That's what he came up with, was this, the whole narrative. Like, it's really, because most people, when you say dispensationalism, they're like, oh, that sounds weird. Tell me more. I've never heard of dispensationalism. You don't know it by that name.
No.
But if I just tell you this story, here's the story. There's going to be this guy who shows up at the end and at the end times. And he's going to be, everyone's going to think he's the greatest thing. They're going to think he's the greatest leader, and they're all going to trust him. And he's going to make a treaty with Israel, a peace treaty, like a world peace treaty. And but then after like 3.5 years, he's going to break that treaty, and suddenly we're going to realize, oh, holy crap, this guy is the Antichrist, and he's going to put Christians in these concentration camps, and he's going to make everyone take this mark of the beast on their forehead or their hand, and he's going to demand that you worship him. Oh, and there's going to be the temple in Jerusalem is going to be rebuilt, because it has to be, so that he can go in and stop the daily sacrifice, which has to get started again. So we're waiting for that to happen. So, but once the temple gets rebuilt in Jerusalem, and then the Jewish priests are continuing the daily sacrifice again, then he'll jump in, stop the daily sacrifice, declare himself to be God, demand himself to be worshipped, and then there's going to be this tribulation period, and maybe there's a rapture before that of Christians, or maybe it's during the tribulation, or maybe it's after the tribulation, but one way or the other. And that's this choice you're saying we have.
Mm.
And when the rapture happens either before, during, or after that tribulation, but then at the end of the tribulation, Jesus comes back and there's a trumpet, and then there's this massive battle that's awesome, and then Christians win, and those that took the mark of the beast are destroyed or thrown into the lake of fire, and then everything's happy again. The end. So if any of that story you've ever been told and you believe that that is what the Bible teaches, you believe dispensationalism. That whole story is made up. That is not what the Bible teaches. That's not what Daniel says. That's not what Jesus says in the Discourse. That's not even what the book of Revelation is talking about. It's a story that literally only works if I first tell you that story. First, I have to tell you that story, and then you go, whoa. And then after I told you the story, I go, now let's look at this verse over here in Daniel. See, this verse in Daniel proves that part of the story. Now let's jump over here to Matthew 24, and this right here, this verse, that proves this other part of the story. Now let's jump over here to Revelation, and let's read these verses, and that proves this other part of the story, or First Thessalonians or whatever. So you end up jumping to all kinds of different places in the Bible to prove the story that I told you.
Right.
But again, it took 1,830 years for anybody to come up with that story. And until I tell you the story and then try to prove it from the Bible, if you just read the Bible, you wouldn't come up with that story, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, the problem with it. But now that you've been told that story, this is one of the most difficult things to overcome, is it's a hell of a story. I mean, dude, if you film that story, it's a Jerry Bruckheimer, Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, multi-million-dollar budget, amazing special effects. It's got 12-headed dragons with 9 eyes and 3 horns flying out of bottomless pits. It's got these, horses with the tails of scorpions that are stinging people, and hailstones that are 100 pounds, and fire from the sky, and oh my gosh, it's like a freaking amazing story. It's so cool. Yeah. It's a cool story. So if I tell you and convince you, that whole story, it's nonsense. And now I take that away from you. The problem is the story that I give you to replace that, nothing will ever compare to that story. You know what I mean? Like, we love that story. It's so cool. And if I take that away and I tell you that's not real, and I tell you what it actually is, I'll tell you one thing, it's just not going to be as amazing and cool as that story, right? It's not going to make a good movie.
I still think it doesn't feed our desires. It's a bit like when we talk about hell, and we compare something like eternal conscious torment with, or even annihilationism with kind of some sort of universal reconciliation. Like, on one level, you look at that and you go, well, everyone would want universal reconciliation, right? But then you actually go, well, okay, let's look at the heart of people and what they desire. Actually, deep down, we all really, really, really want to be able to say, I get rewarded for my good stuff, and I overcame my bad stuff, and I'm the hero, and I'm wonderful, and I get blessed, and all that good stuff. And much deeper than that, I want to see people that wronged me and did evil in this world get what they deserve. And I think, with that, I think that's one of those challenges when you look at something like hell, it plays into those dynamics of like, I need these elements to be fulfilled, this retributive justice, this punitive justice to be fulfilled. And I think our end times feeds into that heavily, where we're looking for a story, a bit like the Pharisees, we're looking for a story that feeds that desire, that need for, I want to be praised for trying. Do you have any idea? I have no doubt that the Pharisees were working their freaking asses off, right? No question, right? And they really were passionate people. These were lay people that gave up their jobs and did this for free. They really worked their butts off to try and become these holy people. The whole point was they were like, the Sanhedrin are just half-assed priests, and we actually, it's like, imagine half your church, not half, but 10% of your church were like, we think the pastors are just half-assed. They don't really care. They're not really passionate. We're going to really do what the Bible says, and we're going to serve people, and we're going to teach people, and we're going to equip people, and we're going to disciple people, and we're going to quit our jobs and do this full time, and we're just going to really do it. You'd be like, oh, dang, hats off to that guy. He really believes this. That's who the Pharisees were, right? And so no wonder they're like, I better get some kind of reward out of this, right? I'm kind of, on some level, I'm expecting God to go, good job, Dave, or whatever. Maybe a more, I guess David is a Jewish name. I was like, more Jewish name than Dave, but David works. Right. but you know, on some level, that's what we're looking for. We want that kind of like pat on the back. We want God to approve of us. And on some level, I think a lot of us, it's hard for us not to operate out of that desire for validation, for acceptance, for reward. And then the flip side of like, and I really want to see all those people that didn't try, right? A bit like Jonah, you know, any of these kind of prophets, but like, you know, going, I don't want the bad guys to get forgiven. I want the bad guys to burn, right? I mean, I tried hard. My guys tried hard. These guys aren't trying. What do you mean? If they say sorry, they'll be fine. I don't, what do you mean? I want them to burn.
So I think you nailed that. You're exactly right on that, Phil. And I think you're right. It's similar to the view of reconciliation and eternal torment as it is on the end times story. Because what you just described, I run into it all the time. So I teach a course through beadisciple.com based on my book, Jesus Undefeated. And it's about the 3 views of hell. And I just finished up the class last week. It was a 3-week class, but as we're finishing up the class, at the end of the course, I ask everybody, all the students, to sort of write a summary of, you know, what they've learned, and they don't have to agree with me. I just want to know their reaction now that they've learned some new things. And I got a couple of people. That's their problem. The ones who have a problem with reconciliation. I'm just going to paraphrase what one of them actually said, which is just what you just said. I like the idea of reconciliation, but I'm still not comfortable with the idea that it seems like God isn't dealing with evil. And I really need God to deal with evil. It seems like someone should pay for all the evil. And I'm like, now I didn't say this to her, but if we were having a conversation and someone said that to me, I would say, okay, have you committed evil? Have you done some evil? Yeah. So who do you think should pay for that? So you're saying you really, really want someone to pay for that. And so you're saying that what you'd be more comfortable with is because evil has been done and God needs to deal with that evil, that you really hope that God's going to really take it out of you and punish you for the evil you've done. Oh, no, that's not what they mean. Not me. They're like Jeffrey Dahmer and Hitler and technically like that person that I really, you know, pissed me off that I don't like. Right, my
ex-wife, or you know,
my ex-wife. No, exactly. See, that's really what it comes to. So it isn't. I mean, I don't mean to be. I'm not trying to like call people out on something, but I do think it's important for us to, in general, recognize that when we say that, so we sort of generalize the statement. We feel like God needs to deal with evil in the world, but we don't mean my evil. Because when I'm talking about my evil, what would my defense be? I don't know. Christ took care of that on the cross. He forgave you? Okay, what I'm telling you is he forgives you and everyone. But now you're not cool with that. But the part you're not cool with is not that he doesn't forgive your sins. It's that he forgives the sins of other people. Oh, yeah, that bothers me. And so then that we have to really understand that, like, that's the problem. And then to say, I think it was Brad Jerzak who said this, that although I think he told me he was paraphrasing somebody else. But anyway, I'm going to credit
We're just all
Brad.
Circling everyone else's stuff.
It was Andre Rabe.
Yeah, somewhere in the middle, Andre's going, "Are you guys kidding me?"
Yeah. But I think it was. I heard Brad say this, that we have to acknowledge that our view of justice looks a lot like, or is indistinguishable from revenge. That God's idea of justice is restorative justice. It's justice, but it's not beating the payment for what happened out of someone. It is restoring and renewing that person to a state of being and mind that it's restoring them to their original innocence, to the childlikeness they had before they were twisted and bent into someone who would do something evil. And that's true for them, and it's true for me. And again, I understand. Again, that's we're sort of ingrained to see justice as something that looks more like revenge. But that isn't that's not what God talks about when he talks about justice.
Yeah, it's tough. It fascinates me as well because something I face again and again, and this is a bit of a rabbit trail, but I love it. So let's go down it. But because I'm enjoying talking about this, because I think justice is such a fascinating concept. But people frequently will levy against me when I talk about this, talking about restorative justice rather than a punitive form of justice. They'll say, "Well, Phil, like, you're just making a God in your own image." And I'm like, dude, that is such a compliment, because I am nothing like that at all. I don't act like this. You wrong me, and my first thought is, I hope that sucker crashes their car today, or I am not the most forgiving, restorative, healing person. You cut me off in the traffic, and I will laugh when you ding someone else with your your fender or something. I'm retributive. I pick up the paper and it says, child sex trafficking ring busted. They're all going to go to jail for 50 years. I'm like, thank God those suckers deserve it, right? I mean, screw those guys. My default is punishment. This is not a God in my image. This is a God in a very different image. It's in my mind, it's an image of Jesus. It's the image of those prophets and figures that have represented a very different way that humanity opts for by default. But Christ would be in our tradition of Christianity. I'm like, this is a picture of God right here. This guy is going for restorative. He's wanting to overturn wrath, judgment, violence, power dynamics. He's trying to present a different thing. And nobody liked it. If we're talking about the image of man, generally speaking, I think the image of man is a God that runs around punishing people. Right?
Exactly.
I mean, that seems much more likely. So this idea that you're making a namby-pamby God in your own, like, who are these like loving, forgiving people? I don't know. Right? I mean, of course, I know a lot of loving, forgiving people. Most of my friends are, and I am on some level, I'm sure. But that's because I've been transformed by this, not because I created it. And so it's just really fascinating to me that we perceive this as some sort of man-made creation. But if we look at the general heart of humanity throughout the ages, I don't see that being the underlying message where God's coming in going, guys, no, I want you to punish each other when you do something. Right. I want you to get retribution. What are you doing forgiving each other? Like, that's not humanity.
No.
Or it hasn't been.
Yeah, and the pagan, so let's go back to like the pagan gods, right? Are they just loving and forgiving? Or no, are they like Zeus or Quetzalcoatl or the volcano god who says, I need some virgin blood, damn it. And I want someone to be tortured in a horrific way, and I want you to burn them. Give me your babies. I want you to kill stuff. And then maybe for a little while, we'll be okay. We'll be good. That's man's idea of God. That's not, like you're saying. And even the other thing is like why do we act as if it's heresy or it's wrong to imagine a God who's more loving than I am, that's more merciful than you and me, because a lot of times Christians will go back to this thing. They'll say, like, well, there's that scripture that says, God works in mysterious ways and his ways are higher than ours. Like, what they mean by that is that's the mysterious way that God can be loving and still like torture some people.
Right.
But the context of that verse, that God's ways are higher than ours, is actually the opposite. It's saying God is more loving and more merciful than you are. So it's and even that verse I was thinking about, there's a verse that says, mercy triumphs over judgment. Like, that's God's, blanket statement. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Like, we want the judgment. That's us. And God's like, no, mercy. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy triumphs over judgment, right? It's because of God's love. It's the kindness of God that leads to repentance, right? Not giving you the, giving you the paddle or something. So again, we do have to rethink that. You're right. Yeah. And I think it's, I don't know why we struggle with it, but it seems that we do. It's like we're actually, seems like we're more afraid that God might actually be better than we think he is, that he might actually be, better than we think, because it's like we kind of act like, I get this feeling all the time when we get in these kind of discussions with people, like, it's almost like God is good. God is so good, but he's not that good.
Yeah.
Like, are you comfortable saying that? God's so good, but he's not that good.
Yeah. That would be a great chant.
Where's the worship song that says, God, you're so good, but you're not that good?
I'm just picturing, in church when everyone's like, God is good all the time. God is, imagine that. God is good, not that good.
But not that great. God is so good, but not that good.
I'd love that chant back. It would just be so funny.
That would be hilarious.
Oh my gosh.
That could almost be like a little video, like a skit, right? It's like someone like, God is good, yeah, and then some guy going, but he's not that good.
Hold up.
Well, but he's not going to love and forgive everybody. Yeah, okay, yeah, you're right. He's
You're right.
not
You're right.
that good.
God is pretty good.
Yeah, he's pretty good. He's pretty good.
Most of the time, God is pretty good.
To us, I mean, he's good to us.
Right.
But like those other, you better look out. Yeah.
Yeah, in my bubble. I remember I was in America earlier this year, and I was having a conversation with this guy who I didn't know. They were friends with people that were hosting me, and we're talking a bit about this concept because he wanted to understand, because I think he'd looked online and seen that I teach some different things about hell and things, and he's like, how can you talk about this? And we got into this topic of justice, and we started talking about, and the thing that fascinates me, and I always try and open with this because I think it's a very tangible way to approach the topic, is if we look at like the punitive system on earth, how systems and societies deal with criminals is really fascinating. And of course, like, I mean, you're over in America. I know most of the audience, about 60% of the audience, 70% of the audience are in America. You guys have a pretty horrific penal system. It's kind of worldwide acknowledged. It's pretty bad, right? I mean, you've got a quarter of the world's criminals in one country. It's amazing.
It's the land of the free.
Exactly.
Land of the free. But most of them are, but half of us.
And 97% of them never went to trial. But
right.
We shouldn't talk about that. Isn't that unbelievable? Anyway, sorry. When you start looking at these stats, it's just painful. But you know, we look at how prison has operated for a lot of people for the most of history. Is we look at a criminal and we go, they need to be taken out of society to keep society safe. Yes, but actually, generally speaking, that's not the main motivation. They're taken out of society as a punishment. And then they're punished for X amount of years, which we determine, oh, you stole something, that's 3 years. Oh, you smoked this, that's 1 year. Oh, you're that race, well, that's actually 30 years then. Oh,
exactly.
You killed someone, that's 28 years. And you raped someone, that's, you know, somehow we have these years for some crime. And then after you've served that time, you go out. And then we know what happens is across the world in any kind of punitive system on the whole, the recidivism rate, the rate of people going back into jail, is anywhere between about 70 and 95%. Generally speaking, you go in jail, you spend time in jail, you come out, you're worse than you went in.
That's right.
9 times out of 10, spending time with criminals and getting no help for the reason that you performed that crime, and then getting put back into a system, a culture with no help and no support, generally speaking, puts you straight back in and causes you to do more crime. But what's fascinating is there are countries around the world that have started in the last 20, 25 years trialing different models, and they trial restorative programs. So they go, what if we assumed every person that did something wrong? Now, there's probably a small percentage of people that are sociopaths and will just hurt people for the sake of fun or, you know, inquiry and intrigue or whatever. But generally speaking, most people that hurt someone or do something wrong is in a situation themselves, has maybe been hurt themselves, is maybe a victim of something, not taking away from the fact they have done something very, very wrong. That doesn't take away from that. But it does give some framework that goes, oh, this might be why that person killed someone or hurt someone or stole or raped or whatever. Understanding that, it looks forward and goes, well, we could lock them up forever and they won't do it again if we keep them in a small enough cage with enough rope tying them up or something. But if they come out, they're going to do it again. Right. What if instead of doing that, we took them out of society, but not as a punishment, but to keep society safe? Because generally speaking, if you're a rapist, it's not a good idea to send you back into society. But instead to bring you out of society and go, let's heal this person. Let's give them daily therapy, group therapy. Let's talk to them about their past. Let's teach them about healthy relationships. Let's give them education on how to relate to other people. Let's give them education. Maybe get them their their general ed, maybe get them higher education, or maybe give them a qualification, some apprenticeships, things like that. And then once we have established they're healthier and they're ready to go back inside, not once they've done 27.4 years.
It's not some arbitrary number like the magic, like 28 years solves murder, 10 years solves rape.
Every time.
5 years solves stealing something. Yeah, no, it's not. There's nothing magical about the number of years.
Such a bizarre notion. Such a bizarre notion.
Yeah,
but once we've established that you're better, it could be a year, it could be 50 years. You know, let's play it by ear and see how it actually plays out. We then reintroduce it to society. The earliest countries that started experimenting with this went from, I think Norway was the first one, and it went from
Norway, Sweden,
Norway went from 87% and their current of reoffend. And their current rate of reoffends in their restorative justice programs, which is almost most of the country now, is 15.
Whoa.
Isn't that astonishing?
Wow.
People spend less time in jail. They're treated like humans in jail. They're not dehumanized. They're not treated like scum. They prepare their own meals together. They're given good quality meals. They're not fed like dog food like some people.
Yeah.
They're given their own rooms. They look nice. And people are like, what, are they in a hotel to get? No, but they're not like animals. These people are people that need healed and restored.
Yes.
And they go back into society and they contribute to society. A lot of them end up, there was a case in London where a terrorist attacked someone who had been released from jail, and they were like, look at this, like, we shouldn't have released them from jail. If we'd never released them, they would never have attacked this person. He went on like a stabbing rampage or whatever.
Oh, wow.
And so he stabbed like, I think 2 people or whatever. But what's interesting is he was stopped by another person who literally, I think, died giving his life trying to grab this guy and hold him to himself. That other guy that did that had also been released from jail, but was in a restorative justice program. And he was, by all intents and measures, he was a terrible person. I think he'd raped a young girl in his younger life and killed her. And he'd gone through a restorative program. And I'm not saying he was a perfect person or he was better or what, but it shows that he'd had some sort of change of thing where he saw someone stabbing people and gone, that's not okay. I'm going to risk my life. And ultimately he gave his life to try and stop that. That's your 2 models at the most obvious kind of example. Now it's a example, it's anecdotal, but I think the numbers are very clear that this program, this type of program, it's in Norway, it's in Sweden, it's in Finland, it's in the UK, it's in Portugal, Spain. A lot of countries are rolling out restorative programs. Now I say it's in the UK, most of the UK is still punitive, but we're trialing it more and more. We found out that for every pound, so dollar we spend, we save 8. That's how much it's saving.
Yeah.
It's astonishing.
What you're talking about, Phil, it just makes too much sense. And that's why we'll never do it in America. It just
you don't make money. It saves money on how much we're spending. It doesn't save money on how much the people in charge are earning. But ours is run by government. So we're interested in saving money when you're run by a business.
Yeah. If there's a way we could take that model you're talking about, and can we include a slave labor component to that? They can go, like in the morning, they can still go to their psychological group therapy things, but in the afternoons, they can go to the slave labor thing and build couches.
Can they make t-shirts for a penny?
Make t-shirts for free. And if we could somehow modify that, we might have something. We might have something.
Yeah. Well, when you're paid a bonus of 20 grand per like re-entry, or, there's no, anyway, but my point, all of that, right? So all of that, I'm saying to this person, and he's going, wow, that's kind of crazy, it never work. And I'm like, well, it is working. Like, here's the data. I can give you studies. I can show you the actual hard data from different government agencies and stuff. And I was like, but my point being was like, well, if that works so well, and the world is waking up, maybe not America, maybe America needs another 20, 50, 100 years, who knows? But if that is working and the world is going, well, restorative justice is a better program than punitive justice, how on earth do we think God hasn't figured it out? Right? If we have, right? Are the Norwegians smarter than God? Maybe, it turns out. I don't know. They seem to have got the jump on him by about 30 years. But it's fascinating. And this guy just couldn't see it. He was just like, well, I don't know what fantasy land you live in. And I was like, well, it literally is. It's pretty great. It's called Europe.
Yes, it's a wonderful fantasy land.
It's not that great, but I mean, it's a real place and it is working. But he said, well, it would never work. And I'm like, it is working. But it's that refusal to even entertain these ideas. There's something so ingrained in...
Yes, it really is.
And it's more ingrained in Christians than in non-Christians.
Yeah, that's what drives me the most crazy.
That's the hardest part.
Christians seem to be the hardest people to convince that nonviolence works, that loving your enemy works, that blessing those who curse you, like, because there's evidence for this too, by the way. There's been studies done, numerous studies, and there are real world examples of people who have responded to violence with nonviolence or with love, who have blessed those who curse them, who've done good to those who hate them, who have nonviolently resisted violent regimes and have overturned them, who have had incredible results. I mean, there's all kinds of data. There's a girl named Erica Chenoweth. She's done multiple studies on this. I mean, over the last decade, where she has studied all kinds of conflicts around the world. And whenever nonviolent resistance has been employed, it works like 99% of the time. And that when you have some nonviolence with some violence, it's about like 50-50. And of course, then when you violence with violence, it almost like never works because it just creates more violence. But there's all kinds of studies that have been done. And again, it doesn't matter because Christians are the hardest people to convince of these kinds of things we're talking about, even though one of the people that I think is probably the biggest proponent and one of the biggest voices on these kinds of things we're talking about is Jesus.
Mm.
Like, if you just go back, forget the studies, forget you forget all, just go to Jesus. What does he say? Like, someone
Mm-hmm.
told me, if your rabbi, the guy you're following is Jesus, what does he say?
Mm.
This even maps to like what's going on right now, in America right now with COVID. There's all these Christians, uh, saying, my rights are, I'm not going to wear the mask. I shouldn't have to wear the mask. I don't have to wear the mask. You can't
Mm.
force me. This is some evidence that you're trying to control me, and blah, blah, blah. And I just don't get it. I just want to say, okay, I got it. The law tells you, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, tells you that you don't have to comply. But what does the law of Christ tell you? Remember
Mm.
that guy? What would he say about whether you should put your needs ahead of the needs of others, whether you should consider others better than yourself, whether you should look not only to your own needs but to the needs of people around you, where, right, you should, and again, bless those who curse you, do good to those who hate you, can be concerned about the outcast, the weaker, the poor, all that. Like, we've just forgotten that. Like,
Yeah.
that's not really at the front of our minds, that we're really trying to do it. Like, what we're trying to do is to follow Christ, is to follow the teachings of Jesus. And if we did that consistently, maybe this wouldn't be such a problem. But Christians, again, seem to be the hardest people to convince of these things.
Yeah, it's really it's very interesting to me. There's an interesting dynamic. Me and my wife talk about this a lot because we're seeing more and more in the UK a quite an extreme shift. So in Europe, we've always been quite different in our Christianity to America anyway. We not always maybe, but for a long time, a bit like Derby couldn't get the ground running, right? But he went over to
Right.
America and it just
Go to
worked.
America.
But for the most part, you see, and again, Europe is different. It's politically different. It's socially different. We're much more left leaning and things like that.
Yep.
We're much more, we've lost to Satan many years ago. We already, we set up our antichrist. He's doing his thing. I don't know which one you pick, but pick any of them, Merkel or the Pope or, who
Sure.
knows. But what's really fascinating is in the last few years, it seems that Christianity in the UK has kind of gravitated towards a lot of what America has to offer, whether it's charismatic movements like Bethel and things like that. But they're really trying to pull a lot from amazing things that if you're in that framework and you're in that stage of Christianity, that's some amazing. If you're a charismatic Christian, you see what Bethel's doing and this stuff. It's an amazing leap and bounds forward in what's healthy Christianity in my books. Now it's still in other books that I have very unhealthy.
Sure. Yes.
And who isn't, right? Who doesn't have their own stuff they're working through. But it does seem that the UK in doing that has started to grab a lot of these kind of extreme positions. And it is fascinating that 20 years ago, this would never have been a discussion. But right now it's the only discussion in the UK that really, the only people we're seeing with these kind of arguments again are Christians. And I'm like, this is fascinating. You would never, Christians have always been very much anti-violence, anti-torture, anti-war, anti-weapons, all these kind of things. And that's all shifted quite a bit. Yeah, I'm seeing Christians here, giving rhetoric, same sort of rhetoric you're seeing of like, well, it's my right to not wear a mask. And I'm like, but why? What does the mask do? Well, they say it's to protect other people, but I don't have to. And it's this very self-involved Christianity
Yes.
that didn't used to be such a key component to Christianity. And so it's fascinating that for a long time, I saw America kind of playing catch up to the UK and Europe as probably its trajectory. I could go, oh, they're maybe moving in that direction. What's actually interesting is it feels like there's a meeting in the middle somewhere of those that are still in that bubble of Christianity. I think people that are deconstructing and reimagining what Christianity, progressive Christian, there's a lot of other types out there than the conventional movement. But it does feel that there's something about that type of Christianity, this kind of charismatic, evangelical, American Christianity that is deeply rooted in quite a selfish ideology. It's very me, 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 me. I don't know if you would agree with that. And I don't necessarily mean that's a bad thing. I think there's some good components to like having some autonomy and, having a individual kind of path of spirituality. That's quite a healthy thing, in some ways.
Yeah. Can be.
What do you think that is? Like, in your observations, what do you think draws us into that? What is it that causes a Christian to be so passionate about being allowed not to wear a mask and not being told to wear a mask over, just going, oh, this will stop sick people getting ill around me? Yeah, sure, that seems like a really good Christ-like action. What I do to the least of these. That seems like a logical jump for me, but it isn't for some people.
I hear what you're saying. There was this. I think this was recently, and I'm pretty sure I can attribute this quote correctly. William Paul Young, who wrote The Shack, recently did an interview and talking about this issue, and he said, "Your rights are where love goes to die." And I think this is exactly right. And I think so. When I see Christians so concerned about their rights and their individual freedoms and all that, it's to me an indication that we have lost the message of love. We've lost the importance of love, that love should be first and foremost our defining characteristic. Because again, if your focus is loving God, loving your neighbor as yourself, and Jesus boiled it all down to that. What are the two greatest commands? Love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second greatest command is, like the first one, to love your neighbor as yourself. And I think we could say is certainly as it applies to this conversation and the things we're observing, we're not doing a very good job of those two things. We're not really learning how to love God or to love our neighbor as ourselves. And I think I've noticed this in myself, and I think then I can turn and see how it's also been something that I see other Christians wrestling with. And this may take us in a totally different direction again, but it's understanding that idea of loving God and loving others is not a one-way street. It's not me loving God and then me trying to love you or my neighbors. It's reciprocal. Okay. So there's an element, in other words, I can't really, well, let's flip it around. You, Phil, if you try really hard to love me and you're sincere and you really do love me and you're trying your absolute best to love me, but I'm doing this, I'm putting my hands up, I'm holding you at bay, I'm closed off to you, if I don't receive that love, you're not going to be able to love me. But see, that's what we do. So if on one hand I'm trying to love God, but I'm not really receiving God's love. I'm not believing that he loves me. I'm not living as if my identity is I'm someone absolutely 100% totally loved by God. I'm not a worm. I'm not a wretch. I am loved by God. That's who I am. So I'm receiving the love of God, and I'm receiving your love. I'm not wearing a mask. I'm not pretending, not faking. I'm actually willing and wanting to be and receive love from other people. And I'm open to that. I'm vulnerable. That means I can get hurt. And I could then, because if I make myself vulnerable to receive love, it also makes me vulnerable to get hurt and wounded. And that's what happens. But that's part of what it means to practice this whole idea of being loved by others and being loved by God. And if we eliminate that portion of it, if we refuse to allow ourselves to be loved by God and we refuse to allow ourselves to be known and loved by others, we are going to totally fail at this command to love God and love others. Because if I'm not receiving love from God, I can't love you either. And if I'm not receiving love from you, you can't love me. And I'm not really loving you either, because I'm not really allowing my full self into the equation. And I think that's a big, big component. And now there's even so many things wrapped into that. This whole worm theology, what a worm, what a wretch I am. That's part of all of our worship songs. I don't deserve it. I couldn't earn it. And
somehow he loves us in spite of it. Maybe because when he looks at us, he just sees Jesus.
This gets back to the whole, he's good, but he's not that good. And neither am I, by the way. I'm also a worm and a wretch and a scum. And here I am again, Jesus, on my knees, begging you to forgive me. Like we keep ourselves in this posture of always begging for forgiveness, begging for acceptance, begging for God to forgive us again. And so we keep ourselves in that place. We're not really worthy of God's love. We're not really worthy of forgiveness. we can't allow ourselves to be free to see ourselves as people who are loved, truly, radically, amazingly loved by God all the time. Not focused on sins, but focused on reconciliation, right? And with God and with others. Like that to me is a key component. And it seems simple, but I think it's very, very key.
So let me ask you this. So, because this fascinates me, but we're talking about this, how like it seems to be in a lot of cases, Christians that are doing this terribly. But we're looking outside of maybe a lot of conventional, very fundamental forms of Christianity. There's tons of Christians that are doing this amazing, and even in very conventional forms of Christianity, there's loads of that. This is very broad strokes, and it's probably very unfair at times as well. And so I want to make that clear. Of course, there's exceptions to this. There's plenty of amazing people out there. There's plenty of pastors that are going, no, we're not opening our church. We're protecting people. We'll put on food banks, but we're wearing masks, and no one's to come except there's lots of we maybe gather, but we're spaced out. We're not going to sing. So of course, this is not like every Christian is evil or anything like that. But there does seem to be this like dynamic of like, wow, a lot of people are like, this is my God-given right. I'm a Christian, whatever that might be. And maybe lots of Christians will go, well, they're not real Christians anyway, because Christians love to say that. They love to decide who is or isn't. But what I do want to say is, looking at how you presented things there, a lot of it is understanding you're loved by God, and in that being able to love others, being able to love the least of these. What do you think that looks like for those that don't conceptualize God the way that many do as Christians? Because for me, a lot of people outside the church who would probably say, I don't believe in God or Jesus, or maybe I kind of do, but certainly not like that. But certainly a lot of people going, no, I'm done with that, or I've never believed that. I'm atheist, agnostic, I'm Hindu, I'm a mystic or whatever. What do you think that's going on? Is there a component of that playing out in their day-to-day life where it doesn't have the Christianese, it doesn't have the obvious, oh, this is God? Because to me, I'm like, oh, I know loads of people that wouldn't say, oh yeah, God loves me, because I don't believe in God or anything, but they're certainly going, no, it's the loving thing to do, to care for people, to wear a mask. In fact, most of the people that were educating me on that long before anyone else were non-Christian people going, dude, you've got to be wearing a mask. This is how you care for people. Everyone else, it's not even about keeping yourself safe. This is about keeping everyone around you safe. We need to do this. And I'm like, oh, you really care about people. How come you care about people more than me? I'm supposed to be like God, or what do you think that is? What is that a component of? Is there a component of receiving love from God in a secular context or language or way? Do you have thoughts on that?
Well, I do, because I think, and again, a lot of Christians would get really nervous about what I'm going to say, but
it's not too many of those types of Christians listen to this anyway, so
probably not. They're not, and if they are, they gave up a long time ago.
Probably. Well, several episodes ago, I think about 30 episodes ago.
But there's that amazing verse in 1 John that says this radical thing: God is love, and all who live in love live in God and God in them. And so maybe what happens is, like, for Christians, we just have a screwy, sometimes, understanding of who God is and who I am. And so that's what messes us up. But like you said, someone who's an atheist or someone who just gave up on Christianity a long time ago, or you're a Hindu or whatever, I mean, you're not being confused or distracted by kind of screwy ideas about yourself or God, or I'm a wretch, I'm a worm, or God hates me or whatever. So you're not even thinking of that. You're just living in love, right? And according to 1 John, if you're doing that, God is living in you. And in actually a less complicated, screwy way, because you're not distracted or confused by these things that this framework you've been given. You're free to just say, these kids over here are suffering. I want to help them. Or this guy over here in the corner, man, he looks hungry. I'm going to go get him something to eat. Good. And if you could just simply do that, guess what? God is love. And if you live in love, you're living in God and God is living in you. Whoa. It's like the simplicity of it. In some ways, like, people can walk it out and live it out in a very simple way, and probably even if you told them, hey, by the way, what you just did, that was very Christ-like. Whatever. I don't, that's okay. Because what happens in Matthew 25, right? When Jesus stands at the throne of judgment, and he addresses these people and he says, by the way, when you gave, You fed the hungry. You visited those in prison, people in prison. You took care of the orphan and the widow. When you did all those things, by the way, you did it for me, and because of that, I'm going to bless you. And their reaction is, what? We did? When did we do that? I don't remember that, because that's not why they were doing it. They weren't even thinking it. It was not even in their minds. But that's not the point. We're not doing it to do some religious thing, right? It's just operating out of that place of simple love and compassion. If we could just get to that, that's probably better than the theological stuff that messes us up.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I think this a lot. Like, I used to say this all the time when I was a very passionate, good, born again, evangelical Christian. I was like, if there's one evidence of that kind of always messes with me, certainly then I was like, it's the fact that I'm a Christian, and generally speaking, most of the non-Christians I know are better people than me. They're nice people.
They're nice.
This is when I used to preach all about grace and things like that. But this is how grace works, right? I mean, it's evidence that, like, there is grace, because I'm not a particularly better person than any of these people. In fact, most of the time I look around and go, God, I'm a lot worse than these people. And it's evidence that God goes, that's not the point. I'm not playing that game. That's how I used to frame it. And I probably still on some level would frame it that way. But I think it should challenge us. It should challenge us that I look at around and go, gosh, those are people that have no concept of God the way that many Christians do. And they're doing just as an amazing a job loving people.
That's right.
And maybe it is something to do with being able to love yourself a lot better than a lot of Christians can, because they're told you're filthy, rotten sinners, worms, wretches.
They rejected that. Yeah, like, no, what are you talking about?
Yeah. And we've all tried to evangelize to that person and go, right, so hear me out. Hold on to the end. You are filth.
Right.
Well, no, don't leave yet. Hold on to the end. And we're trying to convince people that they're terrible people, so we can then convince them to get saved.
That's right. See, like, you ever watch Ray Comfort? You know who Ray Comfort is?
I do. I had an argument with Ray once on in LA on his soapbox. I once started an argument with him because he was like shaming some young kids. It was awful.
That's what he does. That's his whole shtick. Step one, convince these kids on the beach in California, on the boardwalk in LA or Malibu or wherever. Hey kid, come here. Are you a good person? Yeah, I'm a good person. Oh, let me convince you that you're not. You're an adulterer. You're a liar. You're a murderer. You're a thief, and you're going to burn in hell. Good news, right? You have to start with that, convince them of that first, and then, oh, good, now I'm going to save you from that.
Right. In front of a crowd as well, right? It's not, you're just like shamed in front of everyone.
Yeah, like, oh yeah, you feel like crap. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
It's so screwy.
But that's, I remember I didn't do that kind of stuff in the soapbox or whatever, but I remember, like, having conversations with my colleagues at work, awkwardly going, I've got to evangelize. I've got to try and tell them on some level they're an awful person. And actually, Sheila's really nice. I like, she brings brownies in every Thursday. And like, she's always nice to me and asks me how, I'm like, she's not a terrible person. How am I supposed to convince her? She's just a worm, I'm like, you try to do this intellectual kind of like incredible gymnastics in my head trying to figure it out. It's so fascinating, so fascinating. So we are so far from the end times.
I was gonna say, boy, we got way up, but I was like, whatever.
It's good. But so one of the things I want to ask you about end times is fascinating. I see this as a key component to a lot of people's Christianity, is this need to be persecuted. There's this like persecution complex of like, as a Christian, we need to be being persecuted. If we're not being, because you see it in the weirdest ways, right? Where some of the things that people are being persecuted in, you're like, I don't think that's persecution. It just seems a bit odd. But what do you think? That seems heavily tied into end times. You'll be persecuted or something. Do you know much about what that is or why that's interwoven? Is that a dispensational thing, or does that run? I mean, obviously persecution has always happened in the church to some degree or another.
Yes. I mean, so persecution is something in general that the church, obviously, you can study the martyrs and all that. And it continues to this very day, right? There's churches, Christian churches in Africa and India and all over the place that are being burned, and people are being killed and thrown in jail in China and North Korea and things like this. So absolutely, Christian persecution is an ongoing thing. But it's specifically tied to the end times. The reason why we often will see persecution happening and then we'll use that to say, that's a sign. That's a sign, because, Jesus said in Olivet Discourse that before the end, they will arrest you and they will, bring you to the courts. And, and in those times when that happens, don't worry about what you're going to say. I'll give you the words to say, blah, blah, blah. And so persecution is tied to sort of one of the signs of the end times. But this is what my book is trying to illustrate, is that these end times, quote unquote, end times prophecies that we tend, again, mainly because of Darby's dispensational theologies that have crept in, we tend to have an expectation that this is some future thing that's going to happen, or it's going to happen today or tomorrow. It's like any minute now.
Right.
It's imminent. It's going to happen. And what we miss is that those specific scriptures that are talking about these kinds of things, whether it's the persecution or the tribulation or all these kinds of things that are going to happen, already happened. So for very specifically the Olivet Discourse, which again, it's in Matthew 24, it's repeated in Mark, it's repeated in Luke. And if you lay all three of them side by side, and I recommend doing this, it's actually very helpful to notice that it's the exact same story in Matthew and Mark and Luke, with a few minor variations. And it's those minor variations in those stories that can help you understand a lot of the more problematic things, like what is the abomination of desolation? Because Matthew and Mark just say the abomination of desolation. But in Luke, when it comes to that part of it, Luke tells you what it is. And it's not what you think it is. It's not the story we've been told. But if you read them, side by side, if you study, and I do this in the book, it would take a long time to go through the Olivet Discourse. What you notice is at the beginning, all three times, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the beginning of this narrative, which we have been told is about some future event that hasn't happened yet. The beginning of the conversation is this. They're coming, Jesus and the disciples are leaving the temple. The disciples stop and marvel at this temple, and they tell Jesus, isn't this temple magnificent? Have you ever seen anything so glorious and so amazing? And it was one of the wonders of the world, right? Herod's temple. It was this gorgeous, amazing, incredible temple. And Jesus responds to them when they say that and says, a day is coming soon when not one stone of this temple will rest upon the other, and all of it will be destroyed. Jesus, what? Tell us, when will these things be, and what will be the sign of your coming and the end of the age? So these are the questions they asked Jesus in reference to that temple getting knocked to the ground. And so then Jesus goes up on the Mount of Olives. This is why it's called the Olivet Discourse. And he proceeds to explain to them when and how that temple in Jerusalem that they were just pointing to and marveling at is going to be destroyed. And it's in that context that Jesus then talks about all of these things that we have been told now are about some future thing that hasn't happened yet. And that's a very simple way of looking at it. Now, you'd have to go through, and this is what I do in the book, let's go one thing at a time. What did Jesus say here? What was this about? It's about the destruction of that temple. And did it or did it not happen? Yes, it did. And here's how. And so that's the part that's missing, I think, in our scriptures, is that we have all these prophecies about the coming destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. We have the prophecies of how they're going to happen, but there's nothing written in the scripture that says, and here's how it was fulfilled.
Yeah.
Now, in history, we do. If you study Roman history, the history of the first century, you study the writings of Josephus and some other guys who lived around the same time, then you will get a picture like, oh, here's what actually happened. And that's kind of the missing component. So it's very convenient if you're a dispensational futurist that you can say, well, the Bible says this is going to happen. Well, did it already, did these things happen? Well, apparently not. So apparently we're still waiting. This hasn't happened yet. So we're still looking forward to these things happening. And that is what I'm trying to show in the book, that we've been confused about what Jesus is actually talking about in that passage specifically, and in Revelation. It's very similar, by the way, to what I talked about in my book about hell, because it's the same passages most of the time, where some of them are attributed to hell, and some of them are attributed to the future end times, or second coming or whatever. But they're the same verses that are also representing apocalyptic hyperbole, which is used in Isaiah and Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel, about stars falling from the sky and the moon turning to blood and the sun not getting its light and all these kind of things. Again, this is apocalyptic imagery, metaphorical hyperbole, not about a literal thing that's going to happen, but about it's using this language to describe in sort of cosmic terms a very literal destruction of a city or a nation that's coming, in the future. And so because of that, we sort of take these things literally. Well, the stars haven't fallen from the sky, so I guess the heavens haven't been rolled up like a taco. So Jesus, we didn't see Jesus riding on a pony in the sky, so I guess this hasn't happened yet. Well, those are not literal; they're figurative images. They're even used to describe Old Testament events that we know have already happened. They use the exact same language to talk about the destruction of Edom or Egypt or even Jerusalem in the Old Testament. And so when Jesus uses the same language to describe the destruction of Jerusalem, when that temple is going to be knocked down, he's also not talking about literal events. He's describing in these apocalyptic hyperbolic terms this destruction that's going to come.
That's so good. So this was really new information to me when I first I don't know if you ever tracked with Jonathan Welton back in the day. He was a really great teacher in a lot of ways, and he exposed me to different views of end times teachings, and he had a great book called Raptureless. I loved it.
Yes, I've heard of that book. I have heard of that book. Yes.
It was great, and it went through all the different passages bit by bit, and was like, well, and that happened here, and that happened here, and that happened, and I was just like, how the hell did no one tell me about this? Like, at what point did none of my pastors take a single history lesson in like seminary or uni? Or I just was like mind blown that a huge portion of the Olivet Discourse is really black and white. Like, well, this is just, there you go, you lay it out. I think was it George Ladd's that wrote in the turn of the century about, I think, early 1900s, maybe the late 1800s. He wrote a book all about it. Was a really short book, but he basically lays out this is what 70 AD looked like, and it is brutal. It's graphic. It talks about
it is.
500 to 1,000 people getting crucified every day, and then flinging the dead bodies back over the wall, trying to starve them out. People eating their children. I mean, it's horrific. I think
it really was.
They estimate there was about 3 million people in and around Jerusalem at that time, and by the end of it, there was about 100,000 left.
That's right. And that,
give or take,
that
I don't know the
description
numbers exactly.
Right there of what you just described is the fulfillment of this tribulation that will come upon them that is such as has never come before. That's the language Jesus is using when he describes what was fulfilled and what you're talking about. People eating their own children, people being crucified, hundreds of people at a time. And it was brutal and horrific and crazy. And if you don't study Josephus and Pliny the Younger and some of these other guys who lived around that time, who, by the way, are hostile sources. They're not
great sources. Although Josephus was a bit warped in some ways and potentially hijacked.
And I agree, and I talk about that.
But still hostile, I would say.
Yeah, but not a Christian. He's not pro-Christian. He's not aware. Like Josephus isn't going, Jesus said these things in Olivet Discourse, and I'm going to find a way to report what happened in a way that will, overlap with what Jesus said. He's oblivious to what Jesus says. He's a Jewish guy. He's not a Christian. He's actually pro-Roman. He's just telling you what he sees happening. And so he's reporting what's happening in front of him. And so, but when you read what he describes, and then you look at how it lays up next to Olivet Discourse.
Right. It's like he's reading it.
Mind-blowing.
Yeah.
And again, like you said, no Christian pastor ever, no Bible teacher ever pointed this out to me. And it's crazy. We have more of an appetite for the crazy, fantastic thing in the future that's going to happen. Oh my gosh, won't that be crazy? Than we are for the incredible fulfillment of biblical prophecy that happened, right? That we can point and see like, oh my gosh, where's our appetite for that? Why aren't we curious about that?
Yeah.
So, and I think it's because, right, there's a narrative, there's a story we've been telling that props up a belief system, and we don't want to undermine that. We don't want anybody to question it. So we kind of hush that up and keep that in the corner, because
Hmm.
it's advantageous to keep all that in the future. It's sort of this carrot that we dangle out there
Yeah.
in the future somewhere. You need to be ready. You need to watch out. You need to keep coming back, and
Yeah.
we got to keep the show going. And honestly, I think it seems to me that this is something kind of started probably in the third, maybe second, third, fourth century. Um, there was a confusion, I think, with a lot of some of the later church fathers, and they found themselves in a position where they did still have sort of these prophecies about the future, and it was sort of like, yeah, but if we acknowledge that all of this already happened, it's sort of like, now what? So like, I think we started leaning towards the being open-ended to like, well, maybe these things haven't been fulfilled and we are still looking for something out there in the future
Mm.
in some way. And then that kind of like made it possible for people to sort of like, well, let me come up with a theory and let me connect a dot over here. And again, it didn't become prominent or widely accepted until Darby kind of came up with this, connected all these dots. But I do feel like in some ways there was I mean, I talked to several people some Bible scholars that I respect when I was writing the book, and like, who acknowledged that there's a definite difference between sort of native Greek speaking or Aramaic speaking church fathers who later on were replaced by church fathers who spoke Latin and who didn't understand Greek or Aramaic or Hebrew. And then so there was an understanding about some of
Mm.
these scriptures that they sort of
The
got kind of
disconnect.
lost. Oh yeah, it sort of dissipates over time, which then makes it open-ended for people to come in and go, well, let me tell you how it must fit.
Right.
And I think there is a little bit of that happening, but
Yeah. Well, you see this all the time with a Christian just opening up Strong's Concordance or whatever and going, "Oh, I'll interpret it for you." And you're like, "Do you have any idea how hard it is to read Greek? It's not easy.
it's not
You don't
easy.
do that." It's really, really brutal, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's fascinating though. That dynamic. I had a question that's just completely escaped me. What were we talking about? My brain. I don't know.
Oh, about the end times being kind of like putting a carrot out in the future, something we always have to look forward to that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, I think I don't know. We were talking about how this kind of like there's an element we have to keep something there.
Yeah.
You know, we've got these promises of Christ returning, something going on. But like I know I've read from multiple different scholars now, even about Paul's evolution of what he thinks. You know, and so
Yes.
early Paul, Jesus is coming back any minute. Like people are going, "Hey, Paul, I'm engaged. Should I get married?" And he's like, "No, don't bother. Just, he'll be back in a week,
Yeah.
2 weeks,
Yeah.
5 years. I don't know, but there's no point in getting married and having kids. Just get it done." There's some Hal Lindsey shit right there. Like it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
don't go to uni, don't get a job, just like, don't have kids. Just, Jesus is coming back in 88.
Yes.
You're fine. And then what happens? All the Christians kind of vacate, the education world and, all these
Yeah.
different kind of realms because they all waited for Jesus to come back. But Paul, like, you can see the shift in Corinthians, when he suddenly shifts and he's like, all right, look, I know I said not to get married, but here's the thing. Some of you are burning with like, a desire to get
Desire.
married.
Yeah. Go ahead and
And
get
like,
married.
to be honest with you, Jesus is taking way longer than I thought. So
Yeah.
maybe get married because I think I'm not sure on the timeline anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you
yeah.
can see Paul's stance on end times and some of his severe kind of like extremist positions based on,
Yes.
oh, Jesus is coming back any minute. He seems to like soften up and go, oh, actually, maybe any minute is too soon. Maybe at
Yeah.
some point is a better position to hold because
Yeah.
Jesus isn't showing up for the early church, right? There's definitely
Yeah.
a dynamic going on in the very, very early church where they were like,
Yeah.
well, Jesus is coming back. I don't know what it looks like. And they didn't have like the same kind of like fanciful ideas of what it looked like that we do. But they
Yeah.
thought, well, Jesus is coming back. He said he's coming back. The angels said they're coming back.
Yeah.
But they changed and morphed. And we can see that through
Yes.
church history. We've adapted and so there is this response, I think, on some level in the early church 270 AD, where even if that's the fulfillment of these kind of prophecies, well, Jesus didn't come back, right? So he ticked all these
Yeah.
boxes, and you're working your way through the Olivet Discourse, and you're working your way
Yeah.
through Revelation, and it certainly gets to a bit, and you're like, all right, Jesus, but where the hell are you? Right? It's not like Jesus at the end is
Yeah.
going, ta-da,
Yeah. So, but see, here's the thing, and I don't know. It's so hard, I think, maybe in some ways, to know what was in their head.
Mm,
Like you say, Paul. I agree with you. I do think that Paul's ideas are probably a lot of the early first century Christians. Because their understanding of Christ changed over time.
yeah.
We think he's a rabbi. He's a great teacher. Oh, we think he could be the Messiah. Oh, wait, hold on. Whoa, I think maybe he's the Son of God. And how even the term Messiah became Christ, and Christ went
Mm,
from being sort of a Jewish savior to sort of this cosmic Christ being that is who fills everything in every way, right? And whoa. So absolutely, there are some of these ideas that change, but at the same time, I wonder if even when you just said Jesus is coming back, right? Or Jesus is coming again. We tend to picture the second coming of Jesus again is like you and I are talking, and all of a sudden, what the holy crap? Look outside! Oh my God! Oh my God! It's Jesus! Oh my gosh! Jesus is coming back! Whoa! He came back there! Did you look outside the window? Jesus is coming back! Like that.
yeah.
That's what we think, but that's a dispensational idea.
Sure.
I think
Whose
that
window does he come back outside as well?
everybody's apparently.
Right? Is he just kind of everywhere but not? Yeah.
So you know what I mean? Like we take it as a literal. The guy Jesus physically is up there at 30,000 feet on a horse, and he's about here. He comes. Here he's coming back, and we think of that. But see, I think, especially in the Olivet Discourse, and in the way Jesus framed it. Again, let's back it up at the beginning of the Olivet Discourse. Disciples, isn't this an awesome temple? Jesus, that temple's going to get knocked flat on the ground. Whoa, Jesus, tell us about your coming. Why did they throw your coming into the question about a temple being knocked?
Because he's not gone yet.
Well, it's not only that; it's that there's that phrase about God coming on the Old Testament, as well as even in Revelation, when Jesus addresses the seven churches. He warns them, you better do this and you better do that and stop doing this, or I will come to you. That's not a blessing. Because when he says, I will come to you, I'm going to take away your lampstand. There's going to be some judgment in my coming. So there's this, I think, a Jewish expectation of when you use the phrase, the coming of God, or Jesus coming in the clouds, it's not a woohoo, yay. It's a, you better watch your ass.
Right. Is Zeus with his lightning bolt?
Yeah. And again, not in the sense of God's this angry God. It's more in the sense of like, we haven't listened to God. We've not been following the path God intended us to be on. And now there's a cause and effect. We're now going to reap what we have sown, which is we didn't pay attention to what he said. But it's not a happy thing. It's the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is not a good thing. It's like, who can withstand it? It's a heavy, scary, it's AD 70. It's people being crucified and people eating their babies and death and destruction and fire and lead. It's horrific. That's the coming, I believe, that they were expecting was going to happen. And I think we insert in there this happy sort of rapture, or Jesus comes back and we give him a big hug and high five. I don't know that for sure that that's their expectation when they use these phrases in the scriptures.
Sure.
And even in Paul's writings about the coming. Now,
right.
But
so they see him talking about destroying the temple. They're like, whoa, so God's going to come and destroy the temple. Or you, Jesus, are going to bring about God's coming and destroying this temple and judging Israel in some way. That's kind of how they're perceiving maybe?
Yeah, it's the coming of the Lord, coming in the sense of, yes, in judgment, the end of the age, going back to Daniel, these things that have been prophesied on. So again, I know that even in that language, people get nervous about, I don't see God as an angry God. Again, we have to back ourselves out of that understanding. I would contend that it's not as if what happened in AD 70 is what God wanted. I mean, the reason he sent his son was because he loves the whole world. And his desire was that none should perish, right? That for God so loved the world, he sent his only son, why? To rescue them, to save them, to show them a way to escape and avoid this AD 70 reality. That is not at all. He did everything in his power to warn them, to stop them, to change it, to please, please, please don't do that. So when it happened, we can't picture God or Jesus going, gotcha. That's not he's weeping. It's like, why did he weep when he went into Jerusalem, right? On Palm Sunday, he wept because, oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if only you had known the things that make for peace.
Yeah.
But you didn't, and you wouldn't. And again, even in the Josephus talks about all these signs that God continued to give them all the way up to the day they were
Yeah.
destroyed. That God's heart was not. So in other words, again, it's not God wanting to bring this destruction. He
Right.
doesn't want to bring it, but it comes not because God brings it. It comes because over and over and over again, there was no response to embracing the message of Jesus
Right.
and all the different opportunities they were given to avoid that.
Yeah. Because ultimately,
So
70 AD was the ultimate end consequence of Jesus's message saying, look, if you keep pissing off the Romans, if you keep
yes,
trying to be the great nation of Israel and fighting all these huge powers and trying to
yes,
establish yourself, you're going to get Romaned, right? You're
yes,
going to get what they do
yeah.
well. And that's exactly what happened. So, right, they really just continually, pissed
They
off Rome
refused. Yeah,
enough, and eventually enough uprisings, enough rebellions, and Rome just snapped.
yeah.
And so I can see that. I can see that. I think people still struggle with that. You struggle. I mean, it's the Odyssey at the end of it, isn't it? It's why does God allow millions of
Yeah,
people become 100,000 because a few rebels kept rising up, or why
yeah,
does entire countries starve to death while we
yeah,
all sorts of different things happen. These are the hard parts that many Christians will put on God, and others will go, whoa, 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 this is
yeah.
human
But you know what?
consequence.
Yeah. What I would say about that too, because I had a similar conversation with actually Katie Valentine and I were talking about this. And it's not. I guess I want to be very careful too, because sometimes when we talk about AD 70, what happened there, people hear it sometimes through a filter of, oh, that's very anti-Semitic. That's
Yeah.
you don't. It's like, no. Look, I mean, that's just one example. But I think you could look throughout history, before this and after this, multiple examples of how we refuse to listen to the things that make for peace.
Yeah.
Where over and over again, God gives everybody, every nationality, every race, every people, an opportunity to choose the better path. And because we don't listen, we live by the sword and we die by the sword. And we can see examples of that going on right now in Yemen or in Africa, and the different uprisings that are happening. Like, we're still, we as in humanity, we are all still falling for this. It's not a particular Jewish problem. It's not a particular Jewish, failing or failure. That's, in that particular example, yes, it's something that we can observe that was played out in the Jewish nation, but we could see it played out even in America. We could see it played out in other nations as well, that we still don't know the things that make for peace. And we are still, if we're not careful, we can go down the same path as well. The same kind of warnings are still there for us to observe.
I guess this is the problem with when our traditionally our holy text is a Jewish text, and it's based in a Jewish rabbi who came as a prophet and said, look, if you keep pissing off the Romans, they're going to kill you. And then we go, oh yeah, he's right. Obviously the Jews were wrong. And it's like, yeah, okay, yeah, good, right, stop. Now let's look at all the other holy texts around the world and all the other groups of people who all had, on some level, usually some very wise, mystical, holy person going, hey, if we keep doing this cycle of violence and this ambition of trying to be the great empire and power and whatever, we're going to just piss off the other empire and power, and we're going to create this violence and violence cycle, and it's going to go bad for us. If you honed in on any of them, it could seem very anti that group as well. It's ultimately so what you're kind of painting here is this is a problem that anywhere you focus on, it could be a very, Buddha could potentially be very anti Indian or whatever, anti Asian, but ultimately he's just kind of going, hey, this is a better way, this is the better way to go. And so I think that's a great point, because I think it's very easy to, when you read something like 70 AD and you just read how horrific it is. I mean, it's horrific. And I mean, it's one of the more powerful narratives, because when you read into it in detail, I mean, I'm sure you've done it, like you maybe go into some of your book. I used to teach on this and people would like feel sick, I mean, yeah, I'd have to make sure there's no kids in the room before I kind of told
Oh
them
yeah.
half of
Yeah.
the
So
things.
in my book, yeah, I do. I have like a whole chapter in the book where I go through the 7 signs of Josephus, because Josephus illustrates in, he marks out 7 signs that he says were given to the Jewish people leading up to AD 7. And they're, some of them are kind of crazy. Like they seem like one of them is a cow gives birth to a lamb. I mean, it's like, what?
Yeah, you're going to at least kind of go, okay, what's happening?
Right. Yeah, I mean, there's some crazy things that are like, you got to be kidding. Voices from the sky and visions in the sky. But Josephus says that these things happened leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem. And what's interesting, though, is that a lot of these signs, again, map to a lot of the things that because Jesus even says in the Olivet Discourse, there will be signs in the heavens.
Mm.
And so then later on, when Josephus reports that, well, there were some signs in the heavens,
yeah,
that shouldn't surprise us.
Man, Jesus left out the cow giving birth to a lamb. I'm going to say that was a big one he missed.
Yeah, well, he didn't go into specifics. And even that one, I don't think I go deep into it in the book, but obviously there's a whole lot of symbolism there, right? Because the cow that was being brought into the temple to be offered as a sacrifice, and it suddenly a lamb, it gave birth like in the temple.
Wow.
to a lamb. And it's sort of like this obvious to me, like as a Christian, you could see symbolism like, oh, you're trying to go through this old sacrificial system. You're about to sacrifice this bull, or not a bull, a cow. And all of a sudden, bloop, out pops a lamb. Like, oh, they're a lamb, huh? That's the sacrifice, right? So there's all kinds of symbolism and crazy stuff. And it's not even whether or not you believe those things are true or not. The point is that Josephus reports these signs, these things that happened leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And they're pretty amazing. And they do map to things that Jesus talks about.
So fascinating. So where do you, how do you frame a second coming of Christ? So for me, I probably look at it as a much more symbolic component. There may well be some Jesus figure, that the human that was Jesus somehow comes back at some point, maybe on a horse, maybe with some trumpets, maybe in a cloud, but probably not, in my opinion. I'm not that rooted in that. To me, I would see the second coming of Christ being the body of Christ, people filled with the Spirit of God coming into this earth. Is that kind of what you're tracking with? I'm just intrigued by how different people perceive it, because to me, I'm like, that's a much more beautiful way to see it. That's a much more profound way to see it in my mind. It engages with the symbolism of it. It engages with that kind of the mythological kind of undertones of what it is to be the body of Christ. Is that largely what you've taken away from your study of the end times? It's less pointing to a Jesus riding on a cloud and more embodied in people, or?
Yeah, no, dude, you're exactly right. That is exactly where I kind of go in the second half of my book, is to sort of say,
I'm sorry to spoil your book, by the way.
No, that's okay. It's okay. because we're not going to be able to get into this particulars of it, because all kinds of questions arise in people's minds when you suggest what you just said, that the second coming of Christ, is the incarnation of Christ in the church, in the body of Christ, which is us. And that in some ways, Christ doesn't need to return because he never left. He is alive right now in every one of us. And so, yeah, it took me a while. It's funny because I kind of feel like, I know I didn't invent this view, right? But I sort of came at it myself. You know what I mean? Like I remember sitting in my couch one afternoon, and I think I was reading something in 1st or 2nd Peter or something. And I read this verse and I was like, wait a minute. And I jumped over to Revelation, like 21, and I read something like, oh my gosh. And I jumped back over to something that Jesus says, and like, oh my gosh. And I jump over to Ephesians and Colossians, and I'm like, oh my gosh. And I feel like I just figured this out.
Right.
Like, oh my gosh, the return of Christ is his presence. Like when Jesus says, it's better for you if I go away. And we're sitting here going, today, 2,000 years later, we're going, oh, Jesus, it'd be so much better when you get back.
Yeah. I mean, if we're going to be honest, right, if like Jesus was sitting in the room and could explain stuff to us, that would be better than a lot of our concept of what Christianity is right today. It would be much better if Jesus was around.
Yeah. And so anyway, so I sort of, and so that, but once I sort of like, I felt like I discovered it and I started connecting. Well, then I'm telling people like, oh yeah, that's like this other book this guy wrote, or you should read this.
Wow.
And I'm like, oh, I'm finding out that, oh, I didn't invent this. But I
Man.
feel like I discovered it on my own, right? So,
Yeah.
And that to say, here's what gives, I think, the reason why I mentioned that is that the fact that I could see it means it's there. Like it is something to be discovered in the scriptures where it's from Jesus, from Paul, from the other writings in the New Testament. Like there's plenty of reason to believe that,
Right.
again, like you said, the expectation for the return of Christ, second coming, whatever, that over time it suddenly became a revelation or understanding that, oh, wait a second, Jesus is here. He's on earth right now because he's alive in you and he's alive in me. And as this little mustard seed of the gospel begins to spread and the yeast begins to cover the whole lump of dough, eventually all the world, the kingdoms of the world will be replaced and become the kingdom of our God. That this is how the kingdom of God comes on earth. And then you start reading Revelation. This is the thing about Revelation 20 and 21. Everything about that New Jerusalem picture, I just challenge people to go and read it. Go and read what John describes about the New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ. It's the bride of Christ. So again, we think of New Jerusalem as heaven or whatever, but he says it's the bride of Christ, which is what? The church, which is already here. But it comes down out of heaven but it rests on the earth, and then it spreads to cover the earth. And then that's when you get these pictures of, this throne in the center of the temple and the living water that flows and the trees, the leaves that are from the healing of the nations, which are outside, but they're invited to come in. Like that's a picture, not really of heaven, but of the kingdom on earth, the body of Christ on earth, being Christ on earth and inviting everyone else to come in. Like, yeah, I think that kind of actually makes more sense. And so, again, in my book, I'm trying to explain it and answer the questions. There's lots of questions come up like, but what about the second resurrection? And doesn't that mean like, so again, we have to answer some other kind of questions going forward from there. But to me, that makes much more sense. And so I don't know that I'm really waiting for the physical Jesus to return to this earth. And so, yeah, I do try to talk about that a little bit. Like, so then what are we looking forward to, right? If not that, then what is it we're waiting for?
Yeah. Do you think that, there's a point where, right, of course, the best time to have this conversation is 2020. What a freaking nightmare this year's been, right?
Yes.
And so, and yeah, if you look at it historically, it's been still pretty good compared to most of history, before, right? Geez, did you want to do it in, 500 BC? Would you like to go through a pandemic then? Because I guarantee it doesn't go well for you. It doesn't go as well as it has gone. And so, it's still, we're at probably one of the better pinnacles of time to be alive. But do you think there is a component of just life is pretty shit for a lot of people? And a lot of that's subjective, right? So you're better off than someone 500 BC, right? You've got a fridge, you've got a shop around the corner, you've got a car, you've got AC. Life is fairly good. You've got a fairly decent living standard. You live a lot longer. But from your subjective reality, stuff still goes wrong. Your friends, fall out with you. Your parents die. People get sick. And there's an element of a paradise awaiting, a moment where everything changes and that every tear gets wiped away and it suddenly becomes all fine. I don't have to deal with this crap, or even all the things that caused this to be crap is going to get punished somehow. Going back to that, do you think there's this hesitancy in the same way of letting go of that? Like that's a nice comforting, it's a security blanket in some way, shape or form. It makes us feel better on some level. Having that concept.
Yeah. But again, going back to the conversation we've had, and when you have a conversation about the afterlife, and now, okay, well, we don't believe in eternal torment. We don't really think God's a torturer or destroyer. We think he's a loving father who heals his children. Okay, so after I die, I believe everyone, good, bad, righteous, whatever, we all pass through the fire. We all go through this refining and restoring thing. We're all reset to our original goodness. And where are we? Where's everybody who's ever lived in all time and space? We're in this place where we are face to face with the creator of the universe, the God who loves us, the Abba of Christ. And so that is, we do look forward to that. And that is the sort of thing we can look forward to. It's just saying that that's where we experience that. It's not that on a Wednesday afternoon, I'm bored at work, and then I hear, doo, 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 I look outside the window, oh my gosh, Jesus is coming back, and he's going to establish all that right here and now. And then, hey, Jesus, I'm going to go check that out. But first, I'm going to go see a movie.
Right.
In other words, we for some reason we act like we need that thing that we're saying we're going to experience after we're dead. That it's not real until it's happening right here on Earth in this sort of experiential physical reality we're in. And I'm not even saying that that it's never going to be like, we're never going to have a merging of this physical reality with that spiritual reality. I'm not even saying that that's never going to happen, because if we say that we believe that God's ultimate plan for humanity on earth is for the kingdom of God to eventually reach every man, woman, and child, to transform the whole planet into people who look like Christ, then one day, if I believe it's inevitable, that 3,000 year something, that eventually we will get it.
I'm going to hold you to that, Keith. I'm going to hold you to that date.
Set a date, the year 3010. But you know what I'm saying? Like, at some point, we will get it. I have hope for that in some way this earth will be transformed into the kingdom of Christ in some way. Now, whether that is the spiritual reality that we're translated to after we die or not, or it's different, or, that's another conversation.
Sure. Do you think there's an element as well of like, I don't like this of you, Keith, if I'm honest, because it kind of puts a lot of responsibility on my shoulders.
Yes.
Right? What do you mean? What do you mean Jesus isn't going to come back and fix everything? You mean Jesus is in me and I'm going to fix everything? I don't like doing that.
That's right.
That's a tough pill to swallow, because if I'm honest, I don't feel like I can fix much, right? I mean, I'm lucky if I can record a couple of podcasts a week. I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job. Like, what do you mean solve world hunger, get half of these corrupt world leaders out of all these businesses and governments? And, I mean, what do you mean fix starvation and, all these things? Like, God, can we not just wait for Jesus to come back and kind of just flick the switch?
But you're right. That's the thing. But the danger is, if the longer we wait, the longer we keep offloading it and waiting, well, then we're going to lose this generation. We're going to lose the next generation. And again, scripturally, if we look at, when I look at some of these scriptures, like I think it's in 1 Corinthians, right, where Paul says, or is it Romans? No, I've already forgotten what it is. But it's the verse where Paul says, I think it's Romans. It is Romans, where he talks about, he says, all creation is groaning, not for the second coming of Christ. All creation is groaning and yearning for what? For the sons and daughters of God. That's us, to be revealed, to wake up, to step into our calling as the people who are empowered and filled with we are the incarnation of Christ in the world. We are his hands, we are his feet. Whatever we're doing is what Christ is doing in the world right now. And so, if we don't wake up and get that, if we don't step into our identity and our calling as the body of Christ, creation and Christ, he's waiting for us to wake up and fix it. But as long as we sit around waiting for Jesus to come back and fix it, well, then we're just spinning our wheels. There's no hope for anything.
Yeah. And this is something that fascinates me about this. So I'm listening to this. I'm also aware that a good portion of my population, my audience, the people listening to this, are probably somewhat, if not completely, disconnected from a lot of Christian language. In fact, probably repulsed by a lot of Christian language. Yes. And so hearing this and going, God, this is so exclusive. Oh, the church on earth will, reveal God, and we'll be like, oh, why don't you come and join us? That'll be nice. And it's like, oh God, that's so elitist. So. But the thing is, if you can disconnect from that on some level and engage with it on that mythological level, where this is an ideological persuasion that explains that there are those on the earth who wake up to the reality that they have divinity within, that they have
Yes.
everything within to find love and acceptance for themselves, to love their neighbor, to love their enemies, to transform the world,
Yes.
to make it this beautiful place that will be restored and redeemed and make this world a place that is a paradise.
Yes.
Whether you engage with the texts that inform that or whatever, or you give them
Sure.
authority, or whether you like the word Christ or God or
Right.
whatever, I
Right.
think there's a profound beauty to employing these concepts of restorative justice, of loving your enemy
Yeah.
and your neighbor, of awakening to find love within yourself, and profound depth within yourself, whatever that might be, the universe, divinity, God, Christ,
Yeah.
whatever languages you put to it. It's a profound message. I mean, and to look at it coming from a bunch of Jewish converts 2,000 years ago, it's
Right.
incredibly ahead of its time as well in a lot of ways. Now, that's
Yes.
not to say that, you know, maybe some people even before Christ, Buddha and such, were playing with these ideas and trying to put forward a lot of these beautiful, peaceful, mindful concepts. You know, I'm not trying to claim exclusivity as
Yeah.
either,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it is amazing that these people like Paul and Peter, and especially when you know some of Paul and Peter's past, you're like, dang,
Yeah.
these guys had profound radical shifts to be presenting this
Yes.
concept
Yeah.
of an awakened Christ within,
Yes.
a beautiful
Yeah. And see,
reality within.
it's so funny because Phil, like, I think you and I get this, like, if you really grasp what we're saying, I think it's an extremely hopeful message. But sometimes I've talked to people about this and they're like, oh, Keith, that sounds like such a bummer. Um, and like, why? Why do you think it's a bummer? I think it's the most hopeful message you could possibly have, that we have the ability right now. We could end most of the suffering on the planet. We could end war. We could end famine. We can do this. The message is that God is cheering us on. God is saying, go for it. You can do it. I've empowered you. I've filled you. I'm with you. I'm going to bless you. I want you to do it. I expect you to do it. I'm going to help you do it. I want to give you vision to do it. And you can do it. If you all work
Mm,
together, if you all believe it, and if you want it bad enough, you can do these things and make this world an amazing place. And you're not waiting for Jesus to show up and snap his fingers and do it. You can do it. And we're
yeah,
invited to step into that and live in that and walk in that. And I'm like, and you think that's a depressing message? I,
right.
I don't know. I don't know why that gets translated sometimes as like a bummer. Like, how is that a bummer? I don't understand. Again, unless again, it's just like I don't want to be the one to do it. Like I have to do that. I don't want to do that.
It's tough, isn't it? Because
Yeah.
it's amazing. Because to me, I don't know any human being that doesn't, you know, flick open an article on Facebook or on Twitter, or see in the news or whatever, like this person who grew up in a hard rural place in Africa and taught himself about electronics and built a windmill. I'm describing a movie right now, you know, and gave power to his neighborhoods, and you know, and then moved away and got like a degree, and then came back and started, you know, you read stories or you see a movie or you know, you read an article or whatever and you go, that is what life is about. I want to
Yeah.
do something like that. I want to change. Like, it's hard for any human to read it. Maybe if you're particularly self-deprecating and are have as little self-compassion as I do, maybe you read, oh God, those people just make me feel like crap. But but at least you still go, God, that is what's about though. That's what we should be doing. That's what, you know. No one reads the story of you know, people that victimize entire neighborhoods, or you know, no one's reading Saddam Hussein's autobiography going, gosh, that's what life's about. That's the way to live a good life.
Yeah.
Like, maybe a sociopath or two maybe do, I don't know, but generally speaking, we connect with that thing that we're describing, this thing of
Yeah.
a person fully embodied by love going, how
Mm,
can I bring something of what is good and right and justice
yeah.
and restoration and healing into this world. And
Yeah.
it does pull us, whether we feel that drag of like, oh God, it sounds like hard work, or oh, I'm just not good enough to do it, or you know,
Right.
how would I ever do something? We might have some barriers, but we all feel that tug. I
I
really
hope so.
believe that.
Yeah.
I hope so as well. Maybe I'm being a bit optimistic. I'm not known to be optimistic,
Yeah, I'm
uh,
not either. But
but
see, you know what I mean? I think that what you just described, you know, I think maybe that's our only hope because, like I said at the beginning, you know, when we have this version of the end times, this dispensational futurist idea, and there's dragons and all these creatures and blah blah blah, and then like you take that away, what can you replace it with? Well, I think again, like you said, maybe the story we replace it with is the story and the concept and the idea that you and me, like we are invited to step into, like we get to be the Luke Skywalker. We get to be the Aragorn. We get to be the Frodo who goes and, you know, takes the ring to Mordor and makes this massive and destroy the forces of darkness and you know, bring light and you know, to the universe. Like, I mean, to be invited into that kind of a story, that's even, to me, that's what's better. That's a better story
that's
than
exciting.
Yeah, that's a better story than dragons and.
Well, and the thing is, we find that the dragon is malaria, and we take it out, or we find that the dragon is a corrupt government, and we run for local office, and we start working our way up, and we overthrow it somehow. I don't know, but this is, it's still the, if you can again engage with these concepts of these mythological concepts, you know, they're the same stories that we all run through one way or another. There's no dragons, there's no swords. Sorry, maybe for the Americans it's guns, but there are dragons to overcome. There is a way to be the hero, and maybe that's the most selfish motivation that we can start with, is I want to be a hero. But maybe it's better to at least start with the bad motivation and move towards the good one. I don't know if you can't do the good motivation yet, try and be a hero. I mean, that just sounds like a good move anyway.
But see, it's also like, it's also not this individualistic thing. It's not, I'm not going to do it by myself, right? It's sort of us together. It's the, again, it's what all creation is longing for, is for the children of God to be revealed. Like, so it's all of us.
It's collective.
So it's a collective consciousness and awareness and understanding of who we are. Like, we're part of this army of people, like, or if you want to say it this way, like we're like, it's almost like the Matrix. We're the subversive agents within, you know, the culture, that we're under the radar, but we're subversively looking to change and bring, you know, to bring down the empire and to establish this new kingdom from within. Like, it's more like that. Like, we're operatives, if you want to think of it that way. We're agents of change within a system. And so it's not one of us, you know, you're not Neo, but we're part of like a system that from within that's going to eventually bring about this change. And again, it's that collectiveness, a community side of it as well.
That's beautiful. I honestly think it is a much more, I haven't read much that I've come across where they talk about a second coming of Christ and that concept. It's just something that I've thought along the way. Maybe I stole it from someone at some point. I don't know.
I'll send you the book, by the way. I realized I should have sent you the book in advance of this interview.
I'll be honest with you, I probably wouldn't have had time to read it. I'm rubbish at reading books anyway. But yeah, please do. I'd love to see it. But we should probably wrap up because we're about 2:10. Not bad. Not bad. But I've just realized I've been yawning, and I'm actually very engaged and awake, but my body is yawning, and so I don't want to be too rude, but that's why I've covered my mouth and my eyes are bulging occasionally. Also because wow, also the yawn. So, but I want to ask. Okay, so first of all, your book is coming out 25th of August, right?
Yes, it is.
So what day is that? Do you know?
That is a Tuesday.
Okay, great. So my podcast comes out Mondays and Thursdays. So we can either do 2 days after or a day before. But
sure, yeah.
So either the book is going to come out tomorrow, or it will already be out 2 days ago, by the time people hear it. And it's called Jesus Unexpected: Ending the End Times to Become the Second Coming. Dude, you are on it with titles. Every time I'm like, what's he going to come up? How's he going to do the Jesus? How's he going to give us a list of your books? Because I mean, first of all, you are prolific, but.
Yeah, this is my 5th book in the Jesus series. Yeah, so Jesus Untangled, Crucifying Our Politics to Pledge Allegiance to the Lamb. Then Jesus Unbound, Liberating the Word of God from the Bible. Jesus Unveiled, Forsaking Church as We Know It for Ecclesia as God Intended. Jesus Undefeated, what is it? I just forgot it.
I was impressed. I was like, you're doing well here.
I was doing so well. It's right in front of me. Condemning the False Doctrine of Eternal Torment. Nice. Yeah. And then the new one, Jesus Unexpected: Ending the End Times to Become the Second Coming.
That's awesome. I am impressed. I'm always like, okay, well, do you work from the title back? Not right. Gotta get some whatever. You're working your way through a dictionary with the uns.
Yeah. I've got the Jesus part of it, but usually the subtitle comes at the very end.
Yeah. No, it's great. So I mean, for people that want to dive into this is I mean, a go-to resource to kind of educate. I mean, I'm sure people listening going, wow, I want to know more about, because we just touched on
Yeah, we
little
barely
bits.
scraped
I
it.
mean,
Yeah.
there's so much in there. And I mean, from the history perspective of how the kind of modern kind of theology kind of came about, from the history perspective of what the destruction of Jerusalem, the temple, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
from the individual Bible verses. I know a lot of people can get hung up on that. And then even the, okay, so philosophically, like, how does this play out in who am I? What does this do to me and my culture? And so there's so many areas that, I mean, we could have stayed in one of those for hours probably.
Easy,
And so, yeah, I'd encourage people to check that out. For anyone that doesn't know who you are, they missed your last podcast, they've not come across you on the web, how do they connect with you? What's your best places for people to connect?
Yeah, so I blog at Patheos. It's just my name, keithgiles.com. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter mainly. And I have a podcast called the Heretic Happy Hour podcast that I do with a couple other guys and girls. One girl and two other guys.
It's grown since last time, right? It shuffled around.
Yeah. So Jamal was one of our founding members. He walked away, good terms. He needed to move on. His decision. And so we added Derek Day and Katie Valentine, Dr.
Nice.
Katie Valentine. She's phenomenal.
I've not come across Katie.
Oh, they're both.
I should check her out. I had Derek on a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, I've known Derek for, God, probably more than 10 years now.
He's an interesting guy. I love him.
He's a legend. I love him. So that's cool. That's a good mix. That's a good mix. It must get, man, that's a lot of people. Do you all go on at the same time when you have your discussions on, or do you mix it up? Who's going to be on each podcast?
No, it's all four of us co-hosting. And then Matthew DiStefano, of course, I don't want to leave him out. He's awesome. He's a great guy, amazing guy.
Wow.
Yeah. So we get on Zencaster, and it's kind of, we're learning our rhythm, because it took us like almost 3 years. Me and Matt and Jamal, we learned a good rhythm between the three of us. But now that we've lost Jamal, we've added two new people. We have to learn.
Got to refine that groove.
That rhythm. Yeah, you don't want to over talk, and you want to let everybody else talk, but you also don't want it to. You want to keep that balloon in the air, to keep the energy going. So I think we're doing pretty good, considering we've only been going, I think, like 4 or 5 episodes.
Wow. Yeah. That's a major shift. That's awesome though. I mean, I've only listened to a few of your podcasts. Again, I do not consume content. I don't read much.
No,
I don't really listen to podcasts. I just don't have time. But the few I have, I really enjoy it. Just fantastic. I listened to the one you had, the most recent one I listened to that really grabbed my attention, because I've been wanting to dive into it, is with Steve McVeigh. Because I want to look at more. I've got a couple of books I'm trying to wade through on quantum mechanics. Just purely quantum mechanics. I don't want to muddy it with like, oh, here's a Christian perspective of how you should read it and interpret it. I'm like, okay, no, give me the data, then I'll allow you to tell me how to read it. A bit like, here's dispensationism, now let's look at the Bible. I'm like, well, maybe we should do this the right way around. And so that was fantastic. It was a great episode.
I liked that. Steve was great. That was one of my favorites too. I loved it.
Okay, nice. Yeah, but I was so impressed by how much you guys knew your stuff. Right? It felt like you guys how often is your podcast? Once a week?
Well, we run it. It publishes every other week.
Right.
But we have tons of stuff in the bank. Like we're like a month or more ahead of the publishing schedule.
That's the way
we try to do that. I mean, we've always tried to do our homework ahead of time, so that when we get on, we do sound like we know, we understand the topic, and we're not like,
But that's a lot. That's a lot of homework, right? I mean, if you've got, okay, this week we're going to talk to this guy. We need to who's going to read that book, or who's going to listen to a few podcasts. That sounds like a lot of work. So I'm always impressed by stuff like that. And you do sound like you really, I often have people on and go, I think with our first podcast, I was like, Keith, I'm going to be honest. I've seen your name everywhere. I've not once checked you out yet. I'm really sorry. Tell me about yourself. And so I'm very guilty of that. So I'm always impressed when I come across people that are just like, I'm on it. I know it. Hit me. It makes for a good podcast for sure. But so people should check it out on Facebook, Twitter, and then your Patheos, your website, Heretic Happy Hour. That should give them a good grasp.
That's pretty good. Yeah. And then, if you want to check out my books, they're on Amazon, Kindle, print, and audiobook, depending,
Oh, nice. Do you read them yourself?
What do you mean?
Do you read the audio?
Oh no, the audio. No, it's just too much trouble. It's way too
lot of work.
difficult. It's not just like setting up my microphone and my computer. There's way too much technical stuff.
Right.
But I found a guy. So my last 3 audiobooks have all been narrated by this guy, Eric Morrison, and I love him. I think he's great. And I've heard some people also have said they like him a lot. So
Nice.
I like his voice. I like the way he reads. He brings me to tears sometimes. I've listened to some of the recordings because I have to proof them before they publish,
Right. Yeah.
And I'll hear him reading my words and I'm like, did I write that? Wow, he just makes me sound so much better. I'm like, wow, I gotta go back and check that. Is that what I wrote? So yeah, I really like the audiobooks. I like the way he does that.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. That's good. I'm always fascinated by that component. Of people that choose to read their own stuff or don't. But I feel like if I hadn't heard you and built a bit of connection with you, I wouldn't mind. But once I've heard people a lot, like I've read a lot of this, I've watched a lot of their YouTube videos or something. I'm like,
you hear their voice.
You're not Keith. Imposter. Imposter.
That's not Keith. Yeah.
Yeah, that's funny. Awesome. Well, Keith, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks a lot, Phil.
I'm glad to have you back on. It's been a couple months, so you're gearing up to be a regular. So, and I'm very pleased with it. So the way you bash out your books, we'll get you back on again for sure next book, and we'll go into depth on that. But we could probably do a backlog and work through some of your old ones. So they all sound so fascinating. So yeah, great topics to dive into. But it's a privilege to have you.
Thank you, man. God bless. I appreciate it so much.
Love you, man. Catch you later.
Love you too. Bye-bye.